Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had inspired redemption part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story mordereddo from AO3. So let's start the video. Chapter I. For Nana, All Might stood nervously in front of the heavy cell door of Shigaraki's cell. He had been told that the room that held Shigaraki was made out of the best steel in the world. It didn't matter. This alone would not keep Shigaraki inside. His quirk would simply decay the material, which was why they had come up with an additional solution. While he had been restrained in the hospital after being beaten by young Midoriya and 𝗵𝘃𝗃 in an unimaginable team effort between the two, the doctors had clothed his index finger with a glove fabricated of special polypropylene, while his pinky was held into a different glove made out of metallic fibers. This way he would always be touching two different materials at once, meaning that he couldn't use his quirk as long as he wore them. The gloves were connected to his wrists, squeezing them painfully and stopping the blood circulation as soon as Shigaraki tried to take them off. All Might shuddered when he thought about how the justice he used to be the face of could use devices like that, even for a criminal. But then again, there seemed to be no other way to keep Shigaraki from breaking out. How useful his quirk would have been had he chosen a different path. The once #1 hero sighed and looked through the only little window into the cell. Shigaraki Tomura was sitting on his knees on the cold cement ground, his hands on his legs and his back crooked, his face hidden beneath the mop that was his fair silverish hair. He wore a black t-shirt, exposing the bandages that covered his arms. All Might immediately felt sick seeing that they hadn't been changed in a while, being soaked with old brown blood. He had been told that Shigaraki would scream and attack everyone that came near to him, so that they had to wait until he passed out from exhaustion before they could touch him. When Shigaraki would realize that he had been touched or that they had taken a blood sample, he would get so angry as to thrash everything inside his cell, which was why his once luxurious room, including a table, a chair, various books, and even video games, had been emptied more and more every day. It was because of All Might that they had brought him video game systems and books out of his old room near the bar hideout of the League in the first place. The police had found it by accident, shortly after what had happened in Kamino while they were looking for clues in the area. All Might had visited the room as well. He didn't remember anything unusual for a young man in his early 20s. Besides books and video games, the shelves had contained everything from action figures to a lava lamp to even a wet specimen. The walls had been plastered with maps and news articles about All Might and other heroes. All for One had probably raised the boy with a reward system, buying him everything he wanted as long as he did his homework, stimulating his brain and spoiling him at the same time. The police then had confiscated all of Shigaraki's belongings from the computer to every empty soda can, but nothing ended up being of value. All of the stuff that hadn't been brought to his cell had been disposed of, burnt to ashes. When there had been nothing left to destroy, Shigaraki had proceeded to dig his nails into his neck until his blood loss had been so drastic that he had passed out. It was the one time they had to take him back to the villain hospital. Even Recovery Girl had been called for assistance, but since Shigaraki was so thin, healing him with her quirk would have taken too many reserves out of him so that he probably would have died. He had to recover slowly on his own, spending most of the days asleep. About a week after that incident, when Shigaraki had been brought back into his cell, he had reamed his own arms against the rug until he had passed out again. Luckily, the damage had not been as grave as with his neck. The rug had then been removed as well, leaving him with nothing but a thin mattress, a toilet, and a sink. The villain only stopped hurting himself after being warned that he would be drugged into submission if he continued on like this. It had now been almost a month since they had captured him, and All Might had finally been given the permission by the authorities to visit him. He knew that Shigaraki wouldn't answer to any psychiatrists, making the legal process even more difficult than it already was. The judges knew that his upbringing suggested manipulation, which was the reason for him not being completely restrained full-time like All for One or Stain, but they still argued that all of his actions were made consciously. And they were. He didn't show regret or remorse, but then again, he really didn't show anything except for hate and anger towards all around him and the despise he carried for himself. All Might, the prison guard that had brought him here, asked, pulling him out of his thoughts, "Are you all right?" All Might nodded weakly. "Yes, don't worry. I just can't stand to see such a young man behind bars. He should be out living his life to the fullest. He's dangerous," the prison guard told him and typed in the code for the door to unlock. "But I get what you mean. I have a son around his age." He then pulled open the heavy steel door and All Might's heartbeat sped up. "Shigaraki, you have a visitor. Use the time well. If you try anything funny, we will take action." The guard warned the prisoner, but Shigaraki didn't even look up. The guard then turned back to All Might. "You have an hour max. The conversation will be confidential, but we will watch you through the monitor just in case." He then left the two and closed the heavy door again, keeping it unlocked in case of emergency. All Might had already been informed prior to not get too close to Shigaraki and that he would have to sit on the ground, since no chairs or any other materials that could be used as weapons were allowed into the cell anymore. It was okay though. He was happy that the judge had at least allowed their conversation to stay between the two. He didn't want too many people to know about his personal attachment to the criminal. All Might looked at the boy. He isn't really a boy anymore, he reminded himself, but couldn't help but see a child in front of him and felt his heart break. He needed to be objective, but all he could see was Shimura Nana's grandson. How happy she would have been to be a grandmother, and he imagined her holding a child with fluffy pale hair and red eyes, smiling. His mentor had given up her only son, Shigaraki's father, for him to grow up away from the dangers that affected the life of a hero, only for All for One to torment her even in death by abducting her grandchild and twist him into this monster. Time was running and All Might needed to use it. He was only allowed 2 one-hour visits per month, for the beginning at least, and All Might didn't want to waste precious seconds. So he sat onto the cold hard floor and folded his hands. A last deep breath and let's go. Shigaraki, there are some things we need to discuss. He started getting right to the point and noticed how the villain immediately flinched upon hearing his voice. He hadn't flinched when the guard had spoken. Was it because he recognized All Might? The former hero awaited some answer, even just an additional reaction besides the flinching, but Shigaraki stayed quiet. Well, he wasn't known to be cooperative with anyone. Why would he be with All Might? What exactly had the hero expected out of this visit? Had he actually expected anything at all, or did he just want to get to know Nana's grandson? Would he ever be able to see the sunlight again, to smile like Nana had smiled? Focus. It wasn't that the court wasn't willing to shorten his lockdown if Shigaraki had agreed to go through therapy, work towards improvement, and a will of wanting to fit into society. But Shigaraki didn't want a freedom with restrictions. He didn't want to be oppressed by society, and therefore didn't agree to any terms set to him by the court, lawyers, therapists, or doctors. He wanted to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. His mind had been poisoned for so long that All Might's questions were answered right away. It seemed as if Shigaraki would stay in here for the rest of his life. But All Might wasn't one to give up. He had spent nights thinking about this meeting, and he would try different approaches, surprised to find out that his second one would already get him a reaction. Shimura. Shigaraki slowly looked up, his red eyes wide but clearly tired, most of his face still hidden behind the curtain of hair. He would have actually been a good-looking lad if it wasn't for those patches of dry skin. All Might could see that. However, that wasn't important now. He couldn't allow himself to lose Shigaraki's attention. "That is your name, right?" he asked like he was talking to a friend. The villain didn't answer, just snarled, and it was then that a guard's voice echoed through the small cell. "Shigaraki, you are warned," said the voice, and the leader of the league quickly lowered his head again. He knew that misbehaving meant that they drugged him, so he obeyed. Being caged was one thing, but being completely helpless and at their mercy something else entirely. "I just want to talk," All Might continued, and Shigaraki looked up again. All Might hadn't expected to get any answers at all, at least from this first visit, but Shigaraki seemed to be good for a surprise. "Have them kill me," he answered, his voice raspy from the constant screaming, but All Might could still hear the anger and hatred in it. He felt his own heart rip apart. "Kill me while you can, because when I get out of here, I will tear down this world. I will kill all of you in the most painful way possible." All Might sighed. These were the only answers he was giving when he answered on the rare occasion, threats. You would think that after 1 month of isolation and total lockdown, he would start to break. None of that with Shigaraki. "What did All for One do to you?" he asked, his voice full of concern that he wasn't able to hide. Shigaraki then showed one of his crude evil smiles, forming more cracks into his dry lips. It was what came next that All Might didn't foresee. He knew that even with that naivete of his, Shigaraki was still intelligent and cunning. And because he hadn't thought about that, he was taken off guard. "Tell me, All Might, do you care so much for me that you would make them go so far as to give me this cozy cell whereas other villains are not even able to feed themselves? Is it because you think that I was used by my sensei, and I deserve a second chance?" he said quietly and slightly leaned forwards. Surprisingly, no warning came this time, so All Might assumed that there was no danger for now. "You're partially right. I care because this isn't you. You were not born this way, and I am convinced that you can change. You should have been informed that if you went through therapy," he tried to explain, but was cut off by Shigaraki laughing out loud. All Might wasn't surprised that Shigaraki thought of all of this as a joke. This young man seemed to have gone way past sanity a long time ago. How could All Might even know if Shigaraki wouldn't have ended up the way he did if All for One hadn't been involved? Maybe this was truly him. Maybe he had made himself this way. Maybe Shigaraki was already born twisted. "Only one with a mind like his could be my successor." All for One's words. No, he was of Nana's blood. The laughing stopped. "What makes you so sure, All Might? Do you think that you have me all figured out just because of a name?" the prisoner then asked, keeping his voice low. "No, I don't." This answer seemed to satisfy Shigaraki because he smiled again. But All Might wasn't done. but I want to help you either way. I made a promise to your grandmother before she was killed." This was when the climate inside the cell began to change. This was dangerous territory, but All Might had no choice. Shigaraki's was already naturally pale, most likely an outcome of having had to hide constantly, but he looked like a sheet of paper now. His smile disappeared and was replaced with an angry look. His hands, which had laid flat on his legs for all of their conversation, suddenly clenched into fists. "Shigaraki, calm down. This is your last warning," came the voice through the ceiling again. But it didn't show any effect on the criminal, his attention now fully on All Might. "What the fuck does that matter? If she was friends with you, she was probably a wretched hero too. Nana just wanted to protect her family. I don't know what happened to her son, your father, but all of this should never have happened. Who would have thought that her child would grow up to have a child of his own who would then turn out to be one of Japan's most wanted villains?" On the other hand, it wasn't that surprising knowing that All for One had been involved. "Where the fuck are you going with this?" Shigaraki asked, his voice now trembling and his face hidden again. It was a warning, but All Might never backed down. If he wanted to get the upper hand in this conversation, he needed to push Shigaraki out of his comfort zone to where he couldn't defend himself. "I wish I could have been there when you needed me. But All for One got to you first, after he killed Nana." He further provoked and noticed how Shigaraki's body started to tremble as well. "Shut up, shut the fuck up. Fuck off," he murmured, but All Might wasn't planning on going anywhere. He was not a therapist, but he was sure that Shigaraki needed to confront whatever had happened in his past so that he could find the right path, like a bone that had healed the wrong way. He needed to break him again so that the kid could let go and heal properly. If Shigaraki would let him was a different question, but All Might had to try. "Shimura, let me hell," All Might asked, almost pleaded, but was interrupted again. "Don't fucking call me that." Another warning came and Shigaraki started to dig his nails into his bandaged arms. The nails had been clipped so short that he wouldn't be able to scratch dangerously deep. But it still took All Might a lot of effort to grab the young man's wrists and tear them away from his arms. "We're stopping this. Shigaraki, back off," the voice said fast, and All Might trusted the guards of Tartarus enough to know that this situation was getting out of hand. He wouldn't be able to change their mind and prepared to leave, but before he could get up, Shigaraki threw himself onto him, grabbing his throat with slender but strong hands and choking him. All Might didn't panic. He had been a hero for so long, he was used to people trying to kill him. He knew that the guards would be in here any second now, but he still grabbed Shigaraki's wrists and tried to push them away. In this form, however, he didn't stand a chance. Shigaraki was heavier than he looked, pressing his bony knees into All Might's chest, his eyes a gleaming red that screamed in anger and hate in a way that made All Might ask himself why he had decided to come here. It was obviously too late for him. Nothing All Might could do would ever bring down this mountain of hate that had piled up over all these years. He was sure that he couldn't bring Shigaraki back on the path of righteousness. He could just give up now. It would be the smartest of decisions, wouldn't it? Probably, but he had to try. "For Nana, your fault. This is your fault. I hate you. I'll kill you." Shigaraki screamed through his teeth but was suddenly pulled off All Might, who caught the precious air as soon as his throat was free again. He sat up slowly, coughing and rubbing his neck. His attacker was thrown violently to the floor by 4 guards, fighting like a prey for its survival and screaming curses and threats about how he was going to kill them. He didn't even realize that a guard had already pushed a syringe into his right arm, drugging and calming him in minutes. Soon Shigaraki's screams became mumbles, and although he was still trying to get up, his body wouldn't obey him. All Might, who had stood up and watched, became sick. He didn't blame the guards. They had to stop him somehow. He just didn't feel good watching someone get unwillingly drugged into submission, even a villain. It felt like they were stripping away the last inches of his humanity. "Is everything all right? Are you hurt?" the guard that had let him inside asked, and All Might shook his head. With all these people inside, the cell suddenly felt so tiny. "No, I'm fine. Thank you for reacting the way you did. You should get your neck checked, just in case," the guard advised, but All Might shook his head. "No, really, it's all right," he assured the man again and added one of his signature smiles. It wasn't the same as it used to, considering he was now walking around in his true form all the time, but he still got the feeling that the guard had been satisfied with his answer. Remembering that he too was now one of those who needed to be protected, he brushed off the feeling of annoyance he had gotten because of the guard's worry. He had just meant well, and it was his job after all. All Might should have been thankful. His attention went back to Shigaraki, who was now lying still, staring at the ceiling but still mumbling. He prepared to leave with the guards, who had already left the cell, only to turn back again and walk towards Shigaraki, kneeling down next to him, slowly reaching out, slowly, as if he feared that Shigaraki would bite him. The villain didn't even look at him though, and All Might was sure that he wasn't able to. he just kept staring to the ceiling, mumbling things about Sensei and tearing down this world. Sensei, all for one. Sure that he was safe, All Might put his hand onto Shigaraki's head, combing through his unkempt hair, exposing his face. It was an awfully personal gesture, and he knew that the guards would talk about it as soon as he had left, but it didn't matter. Now he knew that his desire to save Shigaraki Tomura from not only All for One's teachings, but also from himself, was more important to him than the world knowing about his attachment towards the boy and his family. He was chaos. The sun was already setting when All Might got back to UA, drowning the block of buildings in warm colors of orange, red and yellow, slowly turning into pink and purple. It was an amazing view, and it somehow reminded him of the past, back when Nana was still around. He had never told her, but to him, she had been like a mother. All Might, someone with a voice full of joy called. Midoriya. He turned around, greeting the student with a waving hand. Midoriya Izuku was his protege, his apprentice, and All Might knew that although the student looked at him with utter adoration, he was slowly but surely becoming independent. And that was all right. Midoriya wasn't All Might, he was his own person. Midoriya's apprenticeship at UA was almost over, less than a semester before he and the others would get their professional licenses, unless they'd failed, of course. But All Might wasn't too worried about that. They all had too much potential. Maybe that was the reason Aizawa hadn't ever expelled anyone in that class. Images of his first encounter with Midoriya flashed through All Might's mind. A courageous, quirkless boy taking action when All Might himself couldn't. The kid had always been so selfless, it was almost angelic. Still, Midoriya had changed a lot in these years, not just his strength or his ability to use one for all to almost its full extent. He had grown taller, his facial features had lost the baby fat, and most importantly, he had become more confident in himself. All Might caught himself dwelling on past events again. He shook his thoughts away, coming back to the here and now. "Hey kid, looking good. How is school?" he asked when Midoriya had reached him. He looked strong and healthy, and although he had grown, he still couldn't quite reach All Might's height, even in his skeleton form. "Ah, the usual. Mr. Aizawa won't let us get a minute of rest," he said while scratching the back of his head. "I'd be surprised if he did." Midoriya smiled, erupting pure happiness, and it was hard for the past pro hero not to get attached by it. He was a proud teacher, not only of Midoriya but of all of them. Class 3A really was special, not that 3B wasn't, but 3A was just something else. "So, where's the rest of your squad?" he proceeded to ask, not seeing another single student on the area. "They're all back at the dorms," Midoriya explained. "I wanted to go for a jog before homework. Mind if I join?" And Midoriya's face lit up once again. When they arrived at the Dagaba beach, the sky was already a deep blue, revealing a galaxy full of shining stars and a half-moon which lit the land in shimmering light. They had not exchanged a lot of words on the way here, and All Might was thankful for that. After talking with Tsukachi about his visit from earlier, he had just wanted to get his head free. Going for a jog was always a good thing to achieve that. They both sat down exhausted and just watched the sea. The wind was warm and comforting, and the waves that crashed into the shore gave off a pleasant sound. No one else was there. All Might, his student, broke the silence after a minute or so. "What's wrong?" They were close, too close to expect Midoriya not to suspect anything. He knew that he shouldn't tell Midoriya, or anyone uninvolved in the criminal's case for that matter, but he needed to get this off his chest. He needed to talk to someone who wasn't a police officer like Tsukachi, someone with a different mindset. "I was in Tartarus today." "What happened? Did someone try a breakout?" was Midoriya's immediate question, and when All Might looked at him, the boy's eyes were full of concern. All Might shook his head. "No, nothing of the sort, don't worry. I just visited someone." That response didn't satisfy his student. The concern was clearly still written in his orbs. "I want to help him, but he won't let me. To be frank, I'm feeling even more powerless than that day at Kamino. At least back then, I still believed that I could help people even without my power. I am not so sure about that anymore," he explained, looking at his bony hands, the words he spoke leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. When you have to save someone, they're usually in a scary situation. A true hero saves not only their lives, but also their spirits. That's what I believe. So no matter how scary things get, give him a smile, as if to say, "I'm okay." The people in this world who can smile are always the strongest. "Master, why did you have to go so soon?" "There was still so much I needed to learn." "How can I save someone who doesn't want to be saved?" Can I know who it is?" Midoriya asked carefully. The ex-hero wanted to deny the request when Midoriya spoke up again. "I promise I won't tell anyone." The older one decided to tell him this little detail as well. If he did get in trouble, so be it. But he was sure that the rumors of All Might getting close to one of Japan's most dangerous villains was already making the round thanks to the guards who had seen him giving the kid some sort of affection. When he told Midoriya, he expected his protege to get angry and shout at him. It had been Midoriya and Bakugo after all, who had put Shigaraki behind bars. But Midoriya was happy. He was smiling. "You're truly still the greatest, All Might, his student said and clenched his fists in excitement. Excuse me. All Might was taken aback and confused by the kid's reaction. Even when everyone else has given up on him, you're still fighting. With or without one for all, you're still fighting. I hope I can one day become a hero like you. Young Midoriya, you are pure light. You will become an even greater one. The younger one's eyes filled with tears when he heard that, but he managed to hold them back. Ah yes, Midoriya didn't cry as much anymore. Who would have ever thought? Don't give up, All Might. The kid went back to the topic. I am sure he's just afraid. I would be too if I was in Tartarus. Afraid? Huh. That's it. 2 weeks later, when All Might returned to Tartarus, 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗀, better known as Gran Torino, was awaiting him in front of the high-security prison's entrance. Already getting attached to the kid, I see, Toshinori. He greeted him accusatory. Well, not that it was wrong. All Might scratched the back of his head, his sunken cheeks blushing while his lips pulled into a smile. Good to see you too, master. The older man just sighed, and All Might was sure he wanted to say something like you never change. But Gran Torino stayed silent. When they entered the building, All Might noticed for the first time how old Gran Torino had really gotten. He had become even shorter, his back bucked, and his pace was slow and careful. Not even the hero uniform he was wearing could hide it anymore. Soon Gran Torino would have to retire for good. They provided the license from the court to the guards and let themselves get checked before passing the metal detectors. Approved. You may pass to the cells now, the guard then said and showed them the way. I did request a special item to be brought into the cell last week. Is it there? All Might asked the guard while they were taking the elevator to the lower floors, passing the levels in which All for One and Stain were kept. Yes, the requested item has been approved and prepared. All Might, the guard explained just as the door to the requested floor opened. Gran Torino couldn't help but look around like a child in awe. He had never been on the lower floors of Tartarus, leaving the visits and the talking to the professionals. But this time, he had decided to go visit his friend's grandson as well. Although he tried to tell himself that it was for reasons that could help prevent future criminality, he knew that wasn't true. When they arrived, the guard took up a small box that was placed in front of the door and quickly handed it to All Might, who took it before the guard let it drop. His face was twisted up in disgust, and he was visibly pleased not having to hold it any longer. The box was heavier than expected. Not because of the weight of the item inside, but because it could be the key to getting Shigaraki to talk to him. Before I let you inside, you need to hear the rules again. I know you've heard them before, All Might, but I am obligated, he said and looked at All Might with eyes that seemed to ask for permission to continue. So the hero nodded. The visit is limited to 1 hour, and we are allowed to intervene whenever we feel the situation could escalate. No items which could be used as a weapon are allowed into the cell. Exceptions are made for us and the doctors in charge for the prisoner. Since you've requested a license for the item you're holding, it can be brought in without legal consequences. There is still no furniture in the cell, so you will have to accommodate yourself. We will be watching you for the whole hour. However, all microphones inside are muted, since this was also approved by the High Court. You are not allowed to talk about the news or any other general outside information. All Might and Gran Torino simultaneously nodded. A lot of rules, but nothing that would incapacitate them in any way. Now, onto the prisoner. Shigaraki has been beyond difficult during those past weeks, the guard said, and his tone of voice showed a hint of sorrow. He was specifically looking at All Might, and the hero recognized him as the one guard who had told him about having a son around Shigaraki's age. After you left, he had tried to pull out his hair and had scratched open his own face, even in his drugged state. No serious damage was done, but he then started to refuse any kind of food or water. The doctors had to force it into him, drugging him every time since he's become quite rebellious again. If they keep doing this, he will more likely die from an overdose than from hunger. All Might felt sick again. Did he really want to go inside? Yes, he wanted to. He had to try to save him. For Nana, die, Gran Torino repeated. The guard then looked at him. Yes, they didn't tell us what they used to calm him, but from what I understand, it's an extremely dangerous injection, and since Shigaraki's already underweight, calculating the proper amount is difficult. Also, his body still needs time to dissolve it. He explained as good as he could. Gran Torino crossed his arms while digesting what he just had heard and looked up to All Might, who on the other hand had not been listening but staring at the heavy door of the cell. The guard then unlocked it and stepped in, followed by the older man first. All Might took a last deep breath and followed. Shigaraki was laying with his back on his thin mattress, the bandages on his arms removed, revealing pale soft skin covered in dozens of still red scars. His hands lay folded on his chest while one finger of each hand was lifted up, even with his gloves on. Old habits die hard. Visitors, Shigaraki, try to keep yourself together this time, the guard announced and then left them, closing the heavy cell door but keeping it unlocked, just in case. You brought another player, All Might. Shigaraki spoke up first to both of the heroes' surprise. His voice was so hoarse, he must have been screaming for hours these past days. I'm not sure you remember, but we've already met, Shigaraki Tomura. 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 said and slowly sat onto the stone-cold floor. All Might 𝗵𝗃𝗏, never leaving his eyes of Shigaraki, who was still staring at the ceiling. He was sober this time, his vision focused, and his scarlet eyes didn't hold that fleeting gray shadow they had when he was drugged. "I remember, old man," he said slowly, the raspy voice making him sound more menacing and evil. 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 smirked at that remark. "Charming as always." Shigaraki then sat up, crossed his legs and leaned back against the wall, directly facing the two visitors. While he moved, All Might noticed the bones under his pale skin and how spidery all of his limbs looked. Yes, he had always been very slender, but now there was nothing on him, and although he tried not to show, All Might knew what a struggling body looked like. Shigaraki was clearly giving it his all just to sit up. "I still need to be cautious with him, even with 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 here," he said to himself and glimpsed at the older man. Right now he was sure that the villain would not attack them. Shigaraki wasn't dumb. He couldn't use his quirk, and although he was faster than All Might, he still couldn't measure himself with someone whose quirk was speed itself. "We have an offer for you, 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗏." All Might started and placed the box he had been holding in front of him. He could feel 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏's eyes on him, clearly annoyed by the fact that he had already gotten so attached to the boy that he had switched to using his real name. All Might ignored him and instead looked at Shigaraki, who had his head lowered, his pale hair hanging like a curtain in front of his face. "I told you not to fucking call me that." His voice was already dripping with poison and his hands clenched in fists, still holding the pointing fingers up, even if he didn't need to. "Will you listen to what I have to say?" The skinny symbol of peace dodged the threat and just went on with what he had planned. This time Shigaraki stayed silent and looked away. The villain released his clenched fingers and cracked them as if preparing for a fight. "Don't you dare move from that spot, Shigaraki Tomura," 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 warned him. The warning had been unnecessary. All Might knew that Shigaraki wasn't going to attack them, even if he smelled of bloodlust. The former hero was trying to build up a relationship to this prisoner, but his master wasn't helping. He understood that 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 was just doing his job and treating Shigaraki like he deserved to be treated, like a criminal. Yes, he may have been abducted as a kid and raised to be a villain, but he had still acted on his own accord. 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 was right, no matter from which angle you looked at it, but All Might just couldn't help it. This young man deserved so much more. Actually, not only him, but also his companions and other criminals. They just needed someone to guide them. "What I have here in this box may be of your interest. I am willing to give it to you if you agree to my conditions." That caught Shigaraki's attention. He shook the hair out of his face and peeked at the box. The cut nails were already digging into the soft healing skin of his arms again, after he seemed to realize that he had been staring with such obvious curiosity. He immediately leaned back to the wall and crossed his arms in defense and distaste. "There's nothing you can give me, All Might." His words were like knives with the intent to kill. "You're a smart guy, Shigaraki Tomura, but you lack experience. We wouldn't have brought this item if we had been unsure about this." 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 now interfered and got himself an angry glare of Shigaraki's burning eyes. "What the fuck would an old man like you know?" He spat, his voice rising and his finger trying to hold onto something he could disintegrate, right now his own arms. Silence followed for a few seconds and Shigaraki bit his cracked lip before finally saying, "Give it to me." It wasn't a request, it was an order. But the heroes were not intimidated, not even by that hoarse, low voice of his. On the contrary, All Might sighed and 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 shook his head. "We are trying to help you, young 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗏. You can either accept my conditions and keep what's inside the box, or we will leave this place and you will never see us, the item, or anything other than your cell ever again." All Might tried again. His master's grandson was unstable in every way possible. Shigaraki was not loyal to anyone but his teacher. He was stubborn, selfish, arrogant, and still very childish. And because of that he was dangerous. Sacrifices, casualties. The cost didn't matter as long as he could reach his goals. He wasn't meant to live in a society. He was so full of hate, he was chaos, he was like a typhoon in a village of houses made of nothing but leaves. All Might knew that in 1,000 lives Shigaraki would have always told them to leave him in this cell to rot. But he didn't, because of the item. Because it was probably the only thing beside All for One that could give him some sort of comfort. This was the reason the criminal had stayed silent for minutes now. He was torn between showing how strong he was and just wanting that disgusting disembodied hand in that box. "Give it to me." He threw himself towards All Might, his fingers spread wide, ready to grab the hero's throat. But 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 was faster, and before Shigaraki could even touch one of them, the older man kicked him back onto the wall. It was then that the voice of the guards echoed through the cell for the first time during this meeting. "We will intervene unless you tell us not to, All Might." All Might stared into the camera hanging from one of the ceiling's corners and explicitly shook his head. No answer came, but the door stayed close. Relief washed over him. Shigaraki was in no shape to fight. He was sitting on his knees, his back bucked while he was holding his stomach, and he coughed so that a thin line of blood flowed down to chin. "Bastard." He managed to get out before coughing again and moaning in pain while still hugging his hurting stomach. This shouldn't have hurt him at all, but he already looked completely devastated. "This is your last chance, Shigaraki. Will you please just listen to my request?" Scarlet Eyes looked up to him, and for a while, they just stared at each other until Shigaraki slowly leaned back onto the wall, still holding himself, and answered, "Just because you begged." "Finally, I have 3 conditions you have to meet from here on now as closely as possible. First off, you will start therapy, meaning you will follow the doctor and psychiatrist's wishes and orders as well as trying to better yourself. The better you act, the more freedom the court is willing to give you." "Fuck the court," Shigaraki commented, and All Might ignored him. Gran Torino just smirked and shook his head again. "My second condition is that you will agree to me visiting you twice a week." "I wonder why," Shigaraki sarcastically added, and rolled his eyes while pulling his cracked lips into one of his creepy smiles. How is it even possible for someone to smile like that? "What's your last point, symbol of peace?" Even Gran Torino turned to look at All Might. His apprentice had quickly informed him about the 2 conditions on the way down here, but he hadn't mentioned a third one. Had he made that up just now? He couldn't think of anything. "I want to call you by your first name. Shimura Tenko is dead." All Might and Gran Torino stepped out of Tartarus and into Tsukachi police car. The officer then started the engine and drove back over to bridge that connected the high-security prison to the main island. First destination was Yamanashi Prefecture, Gran Torino's home. Then Tsukachi would drive All Might back to Musutafu. They should have been talking about today's visit, but Gran Torino had remained quiet from the moment they left the cell. All Might wasn't surprised by his teacher being annoyed, and Tsukachi was kind enough not to push the subject. After some minutes of driving and angrily staring out the car windows, Gran Torino spoke his mind. "This is going too fast, Toshinori. You are pushing your boundaries." "I knew you would say that," All Might said, and guilt hit him. "Toshinori, you don't understand. This is not me speaking. This is what I can see in the guard's eyes. What do you think the media will do once they find out about you visiting him? What will your students' parents do?" "He's right, you know," Tsukachi added. Another minute of silence followed before All Might spoke again. "I agree with you. There's no way I can morally justify what I'm doing." Tsukachi threw a glance into the rear window, but him and Gran Torino smirking, aware that All Might wasn't done. Yes, he couldn't justify it, but he would continue to do it, no matter the costs. It was their responsibility as his friends to be angry and to talk sense into him. But in the end, it was him doing the decision. They were all old enough to know that. "I am torn between doing what's right and doing what my heart tells me to. For years, I have fought for law and order to protect our society. I know that this will most likely be my hardest challenge, but it's what I want to do. If the world could give me anything in return, this is what I want to have, a chance to save a child who has lost his way and bring him back to the light." "Oh, Toshinori," Gran Torino said, "you haven't changed at all. I want to die." Tomura was alone in his cell again, and Tomura was shaking. He didn't know why. Was it because he was angry? Was he feeling frustrated? Or helpless? Something completely different, or just all of those emotions mashed together? He couldn't even tell anymore. He just didn't want any of those feelings. He wanted back that void that had been part of him for as long as he could remember. A void he could feed with hate and death. A void threatening to consume him completely. A void only calmed by Sensei's affection. Instead, he was confused. Not really by All Might's actions. The pest was a hero after all. He was confused by his own. "I want to call you by your first name." All Might's third condition echoed in his mind for what felt like the 50th time. And what had his dumbass answer been? "Whatever. What the hell is wrong with me?" he thought, his hands finding their way up to his scalp and pulling at the fair hair. It was disgusting, oily and sweaty instead of fluffy and soft, and it had gotten longer, almost resting on his shoulders now. He would have loved to tear up the dry skin of his own face and arms until he bled out and died, but since his nails had been cut way too short for his liking, he couldn't scratch himself at all. Those doctors had actually sedated him and cut his nails. Somehow he felt undignified by that the most. What was he, some kind of dog they could keep on a leash and cut his claws whenever they felt like it? At least he could still push them inside the soft skin of his healing arms. It didn't make him bleed, but it hurt nonetheless. Unfortunately, it didn't ease the turmoil inside his heart, not even one bit. His stomach hurt, and he hadn't bothered to clean up the dried blood on his chin. Instead, his forehead had been resting on his knees since All Might and that old guy had left the cell. What was his name again? He couldn't remember. After All Might had named his third condition, he had started to address him with Tomura. His new name. The name his master had given him. The name only his master addressed him with. And that crazy girl 𝗬𝗪𝗻𝐸, of course, but she didn't count. All Might didn't know his real first name, and Tomura preferred to keep it that way. That person didn't exist anymore. That person had died alongside his father who had died at his own hands. Nothing but a stain of blood on a wooden floor in his memories. He shook those thoughts away. They made him human and normal. He needed to fill himself with anger and hate. The symbol of peace had then proceeded to talk about the drugs the doctors had given him during those past weeks and how they were going to kill him or some other shit. But Tomura had not been listening. His mind just fixed on the item in that basic brown cardboard box. Now, the disembodied hand was sitting on his face, but much to his annoyance, it didn't give him the comfort he was used to. It almost felt foreign, maybe because he had not been wearing it for such a long time. But he was not willing to ever remove it. The hand was where it belonged. He would get used to it again in no time. "Father, I am sorry I let them take you," he whispered while slowly caressing the cold gray flesh of his parents' hand, and he was quickly reminded of those eyes filled with disgust people gave him whenever they saw that hand. They would never understand. Only Sensei understood. Tomura could only imagine how the guards must have felt, seeing him show affection towards a dead limb, and he couldn't help but lift his head and grin into the camera hanging from the ceiling. Of course the speakers remained quiet, but Tomura knew that they were watching and he wanted them to know that he knew. But that little spark of satisfaction was immediately snuffed out by the memories of today's visit. The prisoner couldn't even remember what those damn heroes had said when they had left the cell. He was just glad to be alone again, confused nonetheless. Why the hell was he confused? Weren't all of his actions supposed to be right, based solely on the fact that they were his actions? When did I ever start to question myself? Was he starting to get insane? Was he really beginning to break? No, that couldn't be it. He already was insane. The very reason this world as it was now held no place for him or any of his followers. There was no way he could get any crazier than that. Hours passed before the racing feelings inside him calmed themselves. The void he was so familiar with pushed them back into the farthest corner of his mind, tying and caging them up. Darkness returned and the usual thoughts dominated his mind again. I want to kill All Might. I want to die. I want everyone else to die. They didn't want me. I don't need them anymore. I will tear down their world and their moral codes and all of them with it. Had it been a few days, to Tomura, it only felt like hours until All Might returned. This time without his ancient watchdog and holding some pillows under his arms. Tomura couldn't help but wonder if this guy had seriously made a request to bring some fucking pillows into the cell. I brought these for you. That mattress alone must feel like hell, All Might said, and Tomura cursed himself for staring so carelessly. He averted his eyes and combed the now clean and puffed up hair in front of his face. Yes, it had been washed, although not by him. It wasn't as if he did have any choice in that matter. How many times had he been drugged since All Might's last visit? Who could even tell anymore? He just remembered waking up to clean hair and cut nails. Tomura hated being drugged and he'd actually rather obey than being at their mercy. But everyone just made it so goddamn difficult for him. "Where's the hand?" All Might asked, a hint of concern in his voice. He immediately bit his lip and it was obvious that he was thinking about how he could have worded that better. Did Tomura want to answer? What exactly was the point of all of this? Was All Might really just here because he had made some stupid promise to someone related to him? Tomura couldn't remember ever having known his grandmother, so this promise must have been made even before he was born, a long fucking time ago. But this guy was here for the third time after all, so he must have been serious, right? He ruined Sensei's face. He doesn't care about you. He only cares about your name. But All Might did care. Even if only for his name, and that was the point. Maybe this way, Tomura would be able to break out or at least kill him. This is an RPG and I am the main character. If I manage to maintain my role and win this bastard's trust, I might be able to get out of here. Once he was able to use his quirk, it would be easy to free his master and the others. However, could he really do this? Fake improvement. Take the piss out of not only All Might but the guards, the doctors and psychiatrists, his lawyer and all those other fuckers visiting him. What do you have to lose? The symbol of peace is blinded by a promise he made to someone you don't even know. There won't be another chance like this. They took him. He answered. He was right. He had to try it. So this was game start. Him? All Might questioned and raised an eyebrow in confusion. Father. His mimic changed from confusion to disgust, and Tomura was reminded again of how he didn't belong in the world. At least not before he had rebuilt and reshaped it to his liking. All Might could act as if Tomura would have just been a UA student in any other scenario as long as wanted. Even if some damn heroes had decided to save him that one time when he had been so helpless, he would never have chosen the path of a student at any hero academy. His quirk was made for destruction. He could hurt, he could take away. He could kill. His quirk was only there to bring pain and suffering. I can bring him back, but you will have to do better than this past week. A week. A whole week has passed since the last visit. I guess I really was out for good. After a minute of silence, All Might apparently decided to change the subject. He pulled a white plastic bag out from between the pillows and handed it over to him. Tomura didn't take it, so All Might just placed it on the ground. I brought these for you as well. It's socks and shoes. Tomura just stared at the plastic bag. He didn't feel anything by the gifts the hero had brought. Not even hate. He was just empty. You can take your time, young Tomura. I'm sure you'll like them. The ground in here is so cold, you'll find them useful. The hero said and his sunken cheeks blushed. There it was, that fucking smile. Oh, how Tomura longed to tear out his guts. You do know that I had a fully equipped room. Probably courtesy of yours, right, All Might? I crashed all that shit because it came from you. I don't want your fucking help. He yelled at the hero and averted his eyes again. Way to earn his trust, you fucking idiot. That's not how you play an RPG. He couldn't help it. He just hated this guy so very much. As long as All Might lived, as long as Midoriya Izuku or Bakugo Katsuki lived, Tomura could never be truly free of his chains. He had managed to shake society's trust in heroes after that day at Kamino, but who would fear him now that he was in Tartarus? Eventually, All Might sat down, legs crossed and hands folded. Tomura, can't you see we all want to help you? Can't you see how All for One just brainwashed you, used you as his tool to get back at me? All Might actually sounded desperate, and Tomura fed on that, and he wanted more. He wanted to feel all the pain he could inflict on the hero and inhale it, take it in like the sweet fresh air someone took after breaking the surface. For some reason, he imagined it smelling like a Japanese black pine after a rainy day. Why exactly had he thought of that specific tree? So what if he did? It was true though. He didn't care if All for One only saw a weapon in him. Sensei had saved him, raised him, taught him, and that was all that mattered. Not all of that time was good. He remembered bits here and there when Sensei had been disappointed and angry, mainly when Tomura hadn't managed to meet his expectations. Those memories sent shivers down his spine to this day, so he naturally buried them deep within his heart, among so many other painful things. All Might sighed heavily. I want you to be healthy. We had an agreement. Part of it was you listening to the doctors. Please do so and I will arrange for him to be given back to you. What do you think about this? Tomura still didn't look at him, but he nodded. That's good. You may not believe me yet, but I want you safe, Tomura. It is not me who only cares about your name, it's All for One. So fucking what? Tomura answered annoyed and pulled his slender legs to his body. He wasn't even angry at that accusation, he just really didn't give a shit. Or did he? Why don't you tell me something about your life, Tomura? I really want to get to know you better. Another change of topic. There's really nothing interesting to say. Not that I would want to share any of it with you in the first place, he said emotionless. He still didn't get the point of all of this. Nothing in the past could be changed. Tomura was and always would be a villain. It was the path he had chosen. There was nothing to gain for All Might by them getting to know each other. All Might stood up, but when Tomura looked at him, he was surprised to find another one of these stupid trademark smiles instead of disappointment or regret. Sure, All Might may not have looked as strong or heroic as when Tomura first saw him, but the smile was still recognizable. And it gave people all around the world hope. Nana used to say that heroes do not only save other people's lives, but their spirits too, and that the people in this world who can smile are always the strongest. I want to see you smile too, Tomura. Not that villainous grin you gave me last time. A sincere, innocent smile a young man like you should have. And no matter how much you're fighting it, no matter how much you hate me, I will save you from the darkness. Anger rose up inside Tomura, but he couldn't say anything. At this point, he would have just attacked, but he was weak and pathetic. Stand up, Shimura Tenko. You're pathetic. Sensei's harsh words found their way into his conscience, but he pushed them away. I will see you soon. Until then, try to behave. All Might dismissed him. Left the cell, and for the next minutes after that, Tomura tried to dig his nails into the skin of his scarred neck. It had hardly been 15 minutes, yet All Might had already left him. Wasn't it him who had arranged for these visits in the first place? And now he didn't even use the full hour he was given. What was the point of then? It suddenly struck him and he felt stupid for not realizing it earlier. All Might literally wanted him to crave these visits. He wanted him to be addicted to them, opening up more and more to make him return. He probably didn't even care if Tomura got angry or if they got in a fight, as long as he could make Tomura wanting All Might to come back. That wasn't going to work. Stupid All Might. His eyes went back to the white plastic bag placed in between the 4 black square pillows had left as well. He reached forward and grabbed it, pulling it with him as he leaned back to the wall. When he looked inside, a pair of white socks came into vision. The villain took them and immediately threw them across the room. Shigaraki Tomura didn't wear fucking socks. On the bottom of the bag was something else, wrapped in thin recycled cardboard paper. He took it out and realized how slowly and careful his movements were, because hunger plagued him and his vision was starting to get blurry. He decided to get some sleep after this, but he really wanted to see what was inside. All Might had mentioned shoes. It did make sense, with the socks and all. When he removed the cardboard paper, he was holding a pair of new red Chucks in his hands. All Might had bought him brand new Chucks, in his favorite color no less, like those he had usually worn for the past years. All Might had actually noticed his shoes. He had made a request for this item to be brought in. Tomura felt his heart beating faster and he began to shake again. Now that the turmoil was back, he wanted nothing more than pull at his hair, to bite his lip and scratch when there was nothing to scratch with. He took the cardboard paper and ripped it, cutting his 𝗶𝗃𝐻𝐿 with the sharp side of it. biting his lip so hard it immediately started to bleed and trying to shred his arms on the pillows. It didn't work and the soft healed skin on his arms stayed intact. But the emotions he had caged earlier on were loose, torturing him, and he wanted nothing more than to calm them. Desperate for the emptiness that was his life to come back, he bit into his arms and it hurt. It hurt. It worked. But there they were, the guards holding his limbs and drugging him again. Was this it? Was he supposed to live this way for the rest of his life? Remember, Tenko, they can't break you. There's nothing to break. He was tired, so tired. The ceiling was beautiful. A warm feeling radiating from his belly embraced him. It was warm, comfortable, yet he wanted nothing more than to cry. Did you just call yourself Tenko? Your name is not Shimura Tenko. But I want to be Shimura Tenko, because they can't hurt him anymore. The following was the last thing he could remember before falling asleep. They can't break him. There's nothing to break, because Shimura Tenko is dead. But I am Tomura and Tomura is still alive. Out of his ashes, Tomura was at the bar hideout he had started to spend so much time. He was alone. Who knew where Kurogiri was strolling around again? And stood behind the counter in front of all the strong alcoholic liquids. He had wanted to try something out, but had stopped in his tracks when he had noticed his reflection in the mirror. Tomura remembered reading various explanations on why it was a tradition to put up a mirror behind the counter. The first one had been to make it look like there were more bottles, simply meaning more variety and more alcohol. More was always equated with good when it came to the simplistic nature of humans. The second spoke about cowboys watching out for dangers, and he didn't quite remember the last one. Probably something about calming down aggressive customers, but he wasn't sure. He then smiled, thinking about all the crap he read upon for Sensei's various assignments. His master had always given a lot of weight to different subjects. Tomura had exceeded every single of his teacher's expectations, no matter the subject. He preferred math over languages and history, and this preference was reflected in his choice of video games as well. When Tomura looked at himself, he couldn't help but cringe. The boy wasn't wearing father, which didn't help dealing with his anxiety. He had turned 14 not too long ago and had caught up in height, literally growing more than 20 inches for what felt like overnight. But the sudden increase in height had come with the cost of him becoming underweight. Though Kurogiri had assured him that he would gain back some pounds with coming years, he would later find out to be wrong. Tomura would never be a healthy young man, neither in body nor in mind. He normally couldn't stand looking at himself for more than a few seconds, but he was caught in his thoughts. Sensei had always been so patient with him, yet Tomura was not ready. He never seemed to be ready for anything. Why exactly had All for One chosen him? Why? What was so special about him? Was it his quirk? No, All for One could have just taken that. Maybe All for One had just seen his potential after taking him in. Tomura had been so eager to learn, curious like a cat, hungry for all knowledge. But according to Sensei, he had slacked off. It had frustrated Tomura to hear these words, although he knew they were true. He was only letting his master down. A long time ago, there had been nothing but kindness between the two. Now, All for One seemed constantly disappointed and angry with him. It was okay though, because like his father, his master was older and therefore wiser. All for One didn't punish him like his father used to. But even if he chose to, Tomura would take the lesson gladly. He kept telling himself that when father had hurt him, it had been to protect him. It had been because his father had loved him. And that if Sensei would punish him, it would be for those very same reasons. Somewhere deep in his heart, he knew that there was something wrong with him for thinking that way. But he shut it down by remembering the coldness of the streets when no one had helped him. Negative attention was better than no attention. However, All for One never hurt him, even when he was disappointed. Tomura's thoughts wandered to the older man. If the teenager had to describe his master with 3 words, he would have chosen strong, intelligent, and leading, words who didn't fit him at all. He didn't quite understand what society viewed as beautiful or ugly, but he knew that All for One would have counted as handsome. Tomura, however, he doubted it. His skin was dry and patchy and his face laced with 2 prominent scars. He was sickly pale. His hair was the color of old and bland. His scarlet red eyes the only beautiful-looking, distinguishable feature. Where was father? He wanted to hide his disgusting face. The kid looked down at his hands and he slowly put them around his neck, pinky fingers raised. It was something he had been wondering for so long. Was his quirk going to work on him? Would he really die if he just put his last fingers down? The pressure cutting of the air felt good. Almost as good as when father covered his face. His heartbeat quickened. Tomura had always thought that he wanted to die, but when it came to it, he could never go through with it. Another thing that frustrated him, one in so many. Just do it, for fuck's sake. He screamed at himself in his mind. Pathetic. You're not my son. He remembered a big hand, so much bigger than his own, slapping him hard. Tomura wanted to cry. For once in your miserable life, just do something right. It wouldn't kill him, he was convinced. But Tomura couldn't do it. He let his hands fall back at his sides. Angry, disappointed, frustrated, depressed. Then he punched the mirror. The shining shards drilled into his knuckles, and dozens of bottles came flying to shatter on the wooden floor. A disgusting smell of different alcoholics mixed together filled the room, and Tomura breathed hard. The teenager stared at the mess he had made, and when he gazed back into the mirror, tears glittered in the corners of his eyes. He wiped them away with the back of his hand, pulled up his black hoodie and left. Kurogiri would be mad, but he didn't care. Many hours later, Tomura sat in his room. He was just about to annex the newly conquered federal city-state when someone knocked at the door. He ignored it and checked the number of rounds he had played, as well as the current status of gold. He wasn't really doing too well. 𝗏𝗏 protege had been at this game for a few hours now, and he was getting closer to the modern epoch, where he should be able to use his main city's trump card to halve all the military costs. Right now, all the other states were furious about his warmongering and would gear up and prepare themselves to be attacked. He wasn't planning on doing it now, though. His Gatling guns were costly and couldn't travel more than 2 fields per round because he had completely neglected building roads in his territory. If he could only build some WWI bombers already. The someone at the other side of the door knocked again. "What?" he snapped, not turning to look at who opened it. Shigaraki Tomura. It was Kurogiri's voice he was hearing. "Sensei wishes to see you." Annoyed, Tomura paused the game and turned to look at the dark nebula standing in the doorframe. Why? It was hard to read Kurogiri, but Tomura thought that right now he didn't look too amused. "Do not let Sensei wait." The fogman wearing a suit dodged Tomura's question. "While wait," Tomura called, but Kurogiri had already closed the door again. Stupid Kurogiri." Tomura quick saved the game and bent down to get the red chucks underneath his desk, then bumped his head at the hard wood of the table when sitting up. He cursed, rubbed his head, and put on his shoes. The teenager then passed the mirror in his room while walking towards the door and noticed that his shirt was full of chip crumbs. He quickly patted them away. Sensei didn't mind his unkempt hair or the dry patches of his skin, but he didn't like food particles, and Tomura briefly wondered if he had ever seen 𝗏𝗏 eat. He couldn't say for sure. He stepped through the door and entered the big office, where 𝗏𝗏 usually did his work whenever he came to this apartment, which wasn't often these days. The room was clean and well lit, unlike Tomura's room, which was a mess of toys, books, and plastic bags full of soda cans and food containers. Not that Tomura preferred cluttered dark places over clean and tidy ones, but his room was kind of a sanctuary, and he wasn't excited about the thought of someone cleaning and touching all his stuff. And he sure as hell wasn't going to do it himself. 𝗏𝗏 sat in that big expensive office chair, elbows on the table and hands folded while he stared at Tomura. "Sensei." He gave some warmth into the greeting, hoping to see his master smile at him. "Tomura." His master greeted him back, cold and uncaring. Tomura dropped his gaze in frustration. "What happened to your hand?" The boy looked down at it, his knuckles a mix of red and yellow. "It's infected. We will have to clean it," Kurogiri said. "You called for me." Tomura ignored the question and Kurogiri's comment, and his master nodded. "It's time to put your quirk to good use." The boy then started to scratch his neck, confused on what was about to come. "You look tired." Tomura glanced at the clock hanging in the office and his eyes widened. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. He had been back from the bar the day before at around 5 p.m. "I'm sorry, Sensei." He sincerely apologized. "I don't care for any of your apologies. Go to sleep. I will call for you," 𝗏𝗏 said and waved him away. Tomura wanted to defend himself but knew better and left the office without a word. Back in his room, he threw himself face forward onto the bed, unchanged with his shoes on and his wound still dirty. When he couldn't hold his air any longer, he turned onto his back and stared at the ceiling while scratching his neck. Sleep caught him soon, and sooner than he would have liked. Kurogiri was waking him up again. After the third time of Kurogiri calling his name, Tomura lost it and turned to face the nebula, his eyes bloodshot and deadly. "Fuck off already," he screamed and turned his back to the man standing in his doorframe. "Sensei doesn't like to wait." Shigaraki Tomura. "Do not disappoint him," Kurogiri said, his voice always calm yet confident, closing the door. Those words reached the kid and he stood up, his legs weak and a headache plaguing him. He couldn't remember the last time he had taken a sip of water, but there was no time now. He left his room in the same clothes he had been wearing for 3 days straight now and jogged to his master's office. The door was closed, and from outside, Tomura could hear various voices, so he wouldn't be alone. Why was he here again? Ah yes, Sensei wanted to put his quirk to good use, whatever that meant. Tomura entered, and all eyes, including Sensei's, shot to him, and the room went abruptly silent. The small office was filled with 𝗏𝗏's lackeys, members of the union, people who would help him on his way of becoming the greatest of all villains and the heir to his master's throne. "Welcome, Shigaraki Tomura." Sensei spoke to him with his surname first, something he always did in front of others. "What is going on here?" the boy asked, and his hand shot up to his neck and scratched hard. Before he received an answer, someone opened the door behind him, and when Tomura turned around to look at the intruder, he saw 2 guys holding a tied-up figure, struggling hopelessly to get free. "Who is he?" He demanded to know, looking at his master and then back to the man who was fighting in vain. Does it matter? I want you to let him disappear, Shigaraki Tomura. What? Was all Tomura could say. Although he had perfectly understood. All for one wanted him to do to the man what he had done to his father. He wanted Tomura, a 14-year-old boy, to turn another man he had never met into dust. It's time to put your quirk to good use. Do it. Tomura cleared his throat and nodded. He slowly stepped in front of the whining man, who had suddenly stopped struggling, like accepting that there was no escape out of this. Tomura reached for the man's shoulder, his own hand shaking. Images of his father crumbling to pieces in front of him shot through his mind. His father's blood in his hair, on his arms, his clothes, and on those tiny hands. Some part in him screamed, telling him stop. It was 𝗃𝐽𝐻, cute little 𝗃𝐽𝐻 with no shoes on and with fresh wounds on his upper lip and over his right eye. 𝗃𝐽𝐻, the embodiment of his innocence and weakness. He needed to get rid of 𝗃𝐽𝐻 so that he could fully embrace the identity All for One had given him. Maybe, if he could finally get rid of what was holding him back, Sensei would like him again. What are you waiting for? Nothing, Tomura said, and with new motivation fueling him, he grabbed the man's shoulder. 𝗃𝐽𝐻 may have died that day, but out of his ashes, Tomura had arisen. Tomura opened his eyes, the man's agonizing screams still echoing in his ears. It had been the first man he had willingly killed. He had vomited his guts out after that, but Sensei's affection had returned and it was all Tomura had ever wanted. He remembered the months after that event, his master bringing him one guy after the other, all kinds of different human beings he could lay his hands on. It got easier with time and soon Tomura stopped counting. Out of some of the victims, he had made his costume, hands holding him where his father used to grab him, giving him warmth and punishment at the same time. One hand grabbing his hair, 3 holding each of his arms and shoulders, 2 big ones on his ribs, and the last of his victims he had given the honor to hold him around the neck. It had been around that time that All Might had beaten his master and ruined his face, so that he had to be connected to a machine to survive. Tomura still didn't feel any remorse for killing those people. Whatever he had done for affection and survival. Sensei only kept the strong, the weak he got rid of. There was nothing to get rid of with Tomura. He had gotten rid of the weak part in him by himself. I am not weak. I am not weak. Then why do you wish to be 𝗃𝐽𝐻 again? His own voice asked him in his mind. Shut up. He didn't want to be 𝗃𝐽𝐻. Still, he wondered why this memory came back to him at a time like this. He hadn't thought about it for years and now could see everything so vividly whenever he closed his eyes. The drug's effect was fading and Tomura felt like slowly awakening from a coma. He moved from the mattress, touching the cold floor with his fingertips first. How long had it been since he had last used his quirk? Did he miss it? Wasn't it so much easier to live without a destructive quirk as his? He had to admit that with every person he had killed, a part of his sanity had died with them. And now the last of it was starting to fade more and more with every day he had to spend here in this cell. Tomura looked down at his feet, red chucks covering them. He smiled. Don't be happy about it, idiot. All Might had given him these and thrown him into a panic attack with it. He shouldn't have been thankful. All Might was the enemy. 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 He didn't save you. None of them saved you. They didn't want you. You're nothing to them. Still, it wouldn't hurt him to keep the shoes on. The floor was cold after all. Nobody wants you. You're alone. I want to die. The door then opened and as expected, All Might stepped in. Tomura couldn't help but grin at the man he wanted to kill. Show him how insane you are and he'll blame himself. Hurt him in every way possible. There's only Sensei and yourself. Who are you kidding? You're not strong. They're already breaking you. You will rot in here. It's too late. It was a chilly Friday morning when All Might went back to Tartarus. The sky was dark, covered by the grayest of clouds he had ever seen. Blue sky and orange sunsets were no more. Late October really had that ugly autumn feeling to it, and if he didn't know any better, he thought the world was about to end. It poured buckets of rain and the high-security prison looked more frightening than usual. Since 𝗬𝗏 couldn't act as All Might's driver all the time, the hero had rented a car and was currently driving there by himself. He wasn't feeling that good. Not being able to properly sleep made him grumpy and he had lost all appetite. Additionally, this dark weather felt like an omen, a sign that he should turn around and drive back home. On the road to the prison, he blinked a few times at the items on the seat next to him. Various sweets Midoriya had chosen as well as 2 books some nice lady at the local library had recommended to him. Gifts for Tomura. They were reassuring and gave All Might the strength to keep going. When he parked the car and got out, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were no guards standing in front of the entrance. Had something happened? He opened his umbrella, moved to the other side of the car to get the items and walked to the entrance. At the security check, the guards didn't even look him in the eyes, deliberately avoiding them. A nauseating feeling started to spread from his stomach. Something was wrong. They also took away the gifts he had brought without even saying anything. The High Court did assign me a notary regarding my requests for items to be brought in. Those were approved, he said calmly and reached for the bag with the items, but was stopped. We know and we are sorry, All Might. One of the prisoners is causing us troubles, and until we are sure that everything is 100% safe, we will not allow any unusual items to be brought down to the lower levels. The tallest of them explained and fidgeted with his arms at All Might to move through the body scanner. Is it all for one? He asked and passed through. I am not authorized to share this information with you. The guard answered and gave him back his belt and shoes. Please continue with your task. He was clearly signalizing All Might that he wasn't going to give him any more answers, but the symbol of peace was done anyway. He strolled to the elevators and descended to the lower floors, where he saw a new guard standing in front of Shigaraki Tomura's cell. The man was younger than the last guard and probably not much older than Tomura. He looked scared. When All Might approached him, he immediately changed his posture, and the expression of his face went from frightened to happy. The young man greeted him first. Welcome, All Might, he said and smiled with the brightest grins, just like Midoriya. Thank you. Shall we go to the rules right away? All Might asked and looked along the irony-cold floors while the young man explained the rules to him, rules he was hearing for the 4th time now. When he was done, All Might stepped in front of the cell door and looked through the bulletproof little window. Tomura was sitting on the cold floor instead of his mattress, his back bucked as always and the hands loosely folded, pointing fingers always looking up. His pale skin had gotten a grayish undertone in the 3 days since All Might had last seen him, and he could see the blue veins from where he was standing. Those red eyes only an ember instead of a burning fire. Is he on drugs? All Might turned back to the guard, but the man shook his head. He should be sober by now. What do you mean? So you did drug him? He followed up. Why? What had he done this time? Frustration rose inside All Might. That kid really was a lost case. Don't say that. He scolded himself. We did to stop him from hurting himself. Surprisingly, he never even struggled when we intervened. All Might didn't know what to say to that. The guard stepped forwards and peeked into the cell. I am no expert, but it looks almost as if he has given up, he said, more a question than a fact. All Might didn't like where this was going. Are you saying that he's starting to? The young man shrugged. Like I said, I am no expert, but I've seen a few people in isolated imprisonment acting the same way after some time. I guess someone who's had no boundaries or limits before can't really handle being chained. That was enough. All Might needed to speak to him. When he entered, Tomura looked up and greeted him with one of his signature creepy smiles. His wrinkly eyes looked tired, and there were some bandages covering a few spots on his arms. Why did you do that? He immediately got to the topic. Tomura's mimic changed into one of a confused kid, and he suddenly looked so much younger and more vulnerable. What? Why did you hurt yourself again? We had an agreement. This way you'll never get father back. All Might explained. Tomura looked at the ground. The hero sighed heavily and sat down right in front of the leader of the league. He usually kept his distance for obvious safety reasons, but there was nothing Tomura could do to him in this weakened state. I think I'm just frustrated because I thought this would all go easier. I should have known better. None of this is ever easy, but I still had hope. I want to help you. We all want to, but I can see your side as well. You have no reason to trust us. I am trying to change that. We will not hurt you, Tomura. All Might babbled, and Tomura seemed to listen but didn't comment on anything. If the kid wasn't going to speak with him, All Might would just talk and make him listen. At least that way he could see that there was no point in hating the hero. He was just a normal guy after all. Sleep didn't come easy these past weeks. I spent nights awake, just thinking about what I could have done better to protect my master's grandson. I have obviously failed in every way possible. She wanted to shield you from worlds she was part of, from villains and heroes alike. I always assumed All for One gave you an alias because he didn't like the 𝗵𝗲 name. No reaction. I thought I had seen through you, that you would at least try to get along with me so that you could figure how to break out. Tomura snorted. So I wasn't completely wrong for thinking that. All Might asked and added a smile, even if Tomura wasn't looking at him. Every reaction he got was a step closer to his goal. Well, you're going to have to try a little harder than that, the hero said jokingly. Tomura combed his gray bangs in front of his face, hiding from him and the cameras. Don't lose his attention now. I wanted to bring you sweets and books, but there was an interference and it'll have to wait. One of the students chose, he told him, but was cut off. Interference? Huh, you're talking about sensei. All Might bit his lip. He shouldn't have mentioned that. That's not it, he said, but Tomura snorted again. You're a liar, All Might, he said and looked up, his voice suddenly venomous again. A wretched, little lying hero. No, let's shut your fucking mouth. I don't want your gifts. I want you to hate me. I want you to fear me. I despise you, All Might. Tomura suddenly raised his voice and retreated back to the wall. Every movement he made was weak and careful. All Might just waited for the warning of the guards to echo through the speakers, but then remembered that they couldn't hear them and Tomura's empty eyes didn't tell them anything. Every time the young man threw these kinds of words at him, it felt like knives piercing his heart. Do not give up. All Might thought about pointing out that Tomura did wear the shoes he had brought him, so he didn't seem to mind gifts. Provoking him had not gone well on his first visit, but it was a promising way on getting Tomura to react. He wouldn't ask him about the shoes, though. Why do you hate me so much? Tomura grinned. This is meaningless. He'll never change. His brain speaking against his heart. He is Nana's grandchild. You have to save him. His heart defending its position. After all this time, you still don't know? He asked, mocking All Might and then falling into a laugh that was the embodied sound of insanity. You think you hate me, because to you I am the symbol of the ideals you and your comrades fight against. Some for the greater goal of a more just society, some for the simple wish of just feeling good and living an easier life. He is a criminal and this is his punishment. How many other criminals are there more deserving of your visits than him? How many criminals who have committed less vile crimes and ended up in prison anyway? Who didn't choose to become Japan's most wanted villain? Why him? I think that you hate me because I couldn't save you from your fall. You have to try. For Nana. Tomura bared his teeth, his eyes now a burning fire awoken from his sleep. From one second to the next, he turned from a fragile, almost comatose person into a dangerous beast. Watch your words now. Be honest with yourself. It was all for one who taught you about the supposedly wrong ideals of society. And how the fuck would you know that? Shigaraki. The guard's warning came but the prisoner ignored it, too agitated to calm himself down. I don't, you tell me. And I want the truth, Tomura. Tell me that every crime you have ever committed was out of your own will. That everything you did was always justified, and I will leave this cell to never come back. Tomura's eyes widened and all the aggression disappeared from his face. It hurt All Might to see that the kid was suddenly very compliant when it came to him being left alone. But it didn't surprise him one bit. I will even let them bring father back, just so you know that I am serious. So tell me the truth. I did. He didn't hesitate and put on that creepy smile again. I killed my father and then I murdered my old self, Shimura Tenko. All of that I did willingly. There's nothing for you here. There's nothing to save. This one I won. All Might smiled to himself. You're a liar, Tenko. All of the color in Shigaraki's face left him upon realizing what he just had done. Only his scarlet eyes back to burning with fury. We had an agreement that I would get to call you by your first name. You didn't tell it to me until just now. Why would I believe anything you say? Tomura couldn't answer before a horde of guards stormed the cell, some of them grabbing him while others pointed a weapon at his face. The villain didn't struggle, but his eyes told All Might all about what he was thinking right now and none of it was pretty. Fight me, man to man. I'll fucking kill you. He screamed like on All Might's first visit, but the hero could see the progress he had made since then. Yes, it was still mostly threats, but Tomura did answer his questions and it was his own fault for provoking the villain. Tomura quickly resorted to violence whenever his know-it-all attitude didn't work anymore. You should leave, All Might. The young guard from before asked him and the symbol of peace nodded. I'll see you soon, Tenko. Try to behave this time. He told him goodbye and left the cell, followed by the young villains shouting, Fuck you, All Might. I hate you. I hate you. The following Tuesday, when All Might returned, everything regarding the problems which probably had concerned All for One had vanished into thin air. He didn't make an inquiry, aware that the guards wouldn't tell him anything, and went straight to the lower floors, the bag with the gifts of the last Friday in his hand. As usual, the guard told him about the rules again and how Tomura had acted during those past days. He was very compliant and ate his dinner for a change. That is, until today. We had to drug him because he started pulling his hair. It should be wearing off by now. All Might's excitement to see Tomura again was pushed aside by a nauseating feeling of concern. This must have to do with me. He has probably realized the schedule on when I'm here. Do you really think so, All Might? The guard asked and frowned. He shouldn't be able to tell when a day has passed. We are very careful of that. Even his dinner times are random and sometimes he gets multiple a day. He's exceptionally perceptive when he wants to. All Might said and prepared to enter the cell. Inside, Tomura was lying on the floor and staring at the ceiling, whispering some words to himself. All Might swallowed and kneeled down to the villain. His face was exposed, something he probably wouldn't have liked, and he stopped talking as soon as he caught vision of All Might. Leave me, he said and closed his eyes. You know that this isn't going to work. I want to help you, All Might said calmly and sat down right next to him. He reached for Tomura's hands lying on his chest and startled at how cold they were. Don't fucking touch me. I brought you gifts, the sweets and books I talked about, and a comb. He showed all the items one after one to Tomura, but the kid either closed his eyes or tried to look into a different direction. There's nothing I can give you. Just leave me, to die. All Might didn't know anything about the drugs he was given. His mind was clear as far as he could tell, but he seemed unable to move. I don't want you to die. I want you to live and to see this world from another perspective. The symbol of peace took the comb and carefully started to unknot the gray mess. Tomura's hair was clean, but whoever washed it didn't bother for more treatment. All Might also noticed that the younger man's fingernails had been cut again as well. With all this cutting, they seemed to be getting shorter, like those of a nail biter. Not very pretty to look at, but at least safe. While he worked through all the knots, he couldn't help but smile. Caring for a villain's hair, no matter how young he was, would get people talking. What would Midoriya think if he knew? What about the other students? What would the public think? This was one thing he just did for himself. Tomura hadn't spoken another word, so All Might decided on just talking about what came to mind. Those sweets were chosen by one of my students. Was his first lousy attempt. What was Tomura supposed to say to that? Surprisingly though, he did comment on it, Midoriya Izuku. He looked away like saying it, not expecting an answer since he knew that All Might wasn't allowed to tell him. 10 minutes passed and All Might was done with the hair and passed his right hand through it. It was soft and wavy and nothing like Nana's black straight mane. My grandson, the child of my child. A familiar voice vibrated through All Might's whole body. Nana, he asked, but no answer came. Had he just imagined it? Or had Shimura Nana just truly spoken to him via One for All? Suddenly, something grabbed him. 4 long slender fingers were closed around his wrist while his hand was still resting on Tomura's scalp. Red burning eyes stared at All Might, but there was no anger in them. Whatever Tomura was radiating was unreadable to him. Shigaraki, let him go immediately. The guard's voice spoke, but Tomura didn't seem to hear it, his eyes holding All Might as was his hand. Tenko, let go. All Might tried as well, but unlike the guard's order, his voice was calm and asking. It showed impact because Tomura's eyes widened and quickly closed again. His face features pulled into something that looked like he was in pain. Then he slowly let go of the bony wrist and All Might distanced himself from the prisoner, while Tomura slowly sat up and pulled his hair in front of his face. No one entered the cell and All Might let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. You didn't kill me, the symbol of peace stated bluntly. If you haven't noticed, 2 of my fingers are bound. I can't exactly use my quirk, hero. Tomura bawled and grit his teeth. You're still lying to me, Tenko, All Might said and smiled at the young man who furrowed his brows. Whenever All Might got a glimpse of Tomura's true emotions, his heart jumped in joy and it felt like the kid's most innocent and truest self had just brushed him. Those gauntlets don't work on your mind. You still raise your fingers whenever you don't intend on disintegrate, so what? Tomura raised his voice again and clenched his hands and fists, like just mentioned, still raising 1 finger on each hand, this time his thumbs. You think that because I subconsciously decided not to kill you this time, that I'm changed now, that you've somehow redeemed me, that I can live a normal fucking life? There was no denying of the despair in his shouting and how it made him look like a boy crying for help, and All Might wanted nothing more than to take those cursed, killing hands into his and just hold them until all was good and well. He almost did. Almost, because Tomura seemed to realize how much he had opened himself and how small he looked, so that he built back his giant, invisible brick wall straight away and hid his face behind the gray curtain. I don't want to change you, Tenko. I just want you to be healthy and happy. All Might tried to explain to him for what felt like the 20th time. Patience is a virtue and the mother of all success. Those words did something. Tomura looked up and his scarlet eyes peeked between the strains of his hair. A spark of hope glittered in them, but as quick as it had appeared, it vanished and the villain dug his cut nails into the scarred skin of his neck. No, no, you want to break me. You all want me to become some mindless slave. His breath quickened and he scratched his neck furiously. There was no way the guards would not intervene this time, but surprisingly, All Might found himself waiting, because the door remained closed. All the while, the prisoner was having a panic attack. My kind will never be able to live without being persecuted, he murmured to himself and scratched it. All Might couldn't take it anymore. He slowly stood up and walked towards the self-harming prisoner, whom didn't notice anyone approaching, too deep in his own thoughts, trying to remember All for One's teaching and that there was no place for him in this world. Tomura babbled so much stuff to himself that All Might immediately thought of Nana's words. When you have to save someone, they're usually in a scary situation. A true hero saves not only their lives, but also their spirits. That's what I believe. So no matter how scary things get, give him a smile, as if to say, I'm okay. The people in this world who can smile are always the strongest. All of the previous #1 hero's doubts and scruples washed away when he closed his arms around a shaking, thin figure. I am sure he's just afraid. I would be too if I was in Tartarus. Midoriya's words. Tomura was afraid, but not of Tartarus. He was afraid of learning that all he had been taught his whole life was a lie. That there really was a society that accepted him as he was, behind the horizon. Right now he only saw a glimpse of it, but it was enough to shake his very being. Shigaraki Tomura felt cold in All Might's embrace, but the hero didn't let go, and minutes passed with the villain just murmuring and shaking while the hero listened and held him. Tomura asked his master to help him out of here and that he would be useful to him again. Then proceeded to curse about the hero society and ended with pleading to someone not to hurt him. When he stopped murmuring and shaking, he pushed away the taller figure embracing him and pulled his knees up to his body. You don't, he said, no anger, just emptiness, and All Might understood that this was a dead end and that all the prisoner needed right now was time by himself. At the exit, All Might turned around a last time, catching Tomura wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Tenko, he tried again, but the young man's next words hit him hard. It's too late. All Might left. He should have felt victorious about the progress he had made today, like a bone that had healed the wrong way. He needed to break him again so that the kid could let go and heal properly. He hadn't imagined being it this hard to watch. An outcast, this room was monitored by multiple cameras with guards watching him. They were always watching and guarding him. It's been quite some time since you've come to visit me, All Might. Even all chained up, with multiple weapons pointed at him, enclosed between the strongest, thickest walls to be created by mankind. 𝗓𝗨𝗏's voice still sounded sublime and powerful. His lips were pulled in a dreadful smile, which All Might knew never meant something good. 𝗓𝗨 should have long received the death penalty, but this was an area not even the former number one had any influence on. There must be a reason. I can't wait for you to tell me, the villain added. I'm here to talk about the League of Villains, All Might stated, and made sure to always look into the prisoner's deformed face. He himself had destroyed. It could have been over back then, but his rival had survived. Don't show any kind of intimidation. You've prepared yourself for this. There's nothing he can do to you or anyone else anymore. All Might repeated to himself, just like on the drive here. Really, he sounded so smug saying that, about the League, or about my apprentice. All Might kept a straight face. You cannot make a fool out of me, All Might. I chose the grandson of the seventh wielder for a reason, to hit you where it hurts. I knew you'd care about him. That's why you're here, and that's why everything is still going according to how I've planned it. 𝗓𝗨 proudly told him, and All Might just shook his head. Nothing is going the way you've foreseen it. But keep assuming. There's not anything else for you to do in here anyway. All Might couldn't even imagine being strapped to a chair all day long. But the punishment was still too good for someone like 𝗓𝗨, someone who had done all these horrendous things for longer than a human was supposed to live. Oh ho, that snippiness doesn't suit you, All Might. So then I take that my young apprentice is not in prison right now? He asked, but received no answer from the hero. Whatever All Might would say to this, it could give away some sort of information 𝗓𝗨 wasn't allowed to have. You don't have to answer me. I've lived long enough to be able to know when someone wants something, without them actually saying it. There is a question burning under your nails, something you want know so bad it tickles under your skin. You wouldn't have come here after all this time for any other reason. If Tomura didn't have it in his genes, it was clear now that he'd gotten that perceptiveness of his from his teacher. 𝗓𝗨 had gotten everything right until now, and All Might was losing his cool. You can't properly prepare for this. Focus now, no mistakes. Come on, symbol of peace. Don't let an old man like me wait. Why are you here? What have you done to Tom? Shigaraki. All Might bit his tongue. No way 𝗓𝗨 hadn't caught that slip up. All Might smirked satisfied, but did not comment on it. It was a joy seeing him grow up. Such an innocent boy. Always blaming himself. He truly became a twisted man, wouldn't you agree? All Might. The symbol of peace couldn't keep that straight face anymore. His eyebrows pulled down, his pupils contracted, and he bared his teeth, but that didn't intimidate the former kingpin of the underground. Quite the contrary, it just made 𝗓𝗨 want to get more under his enemy's skin. But All Might knew all of this already. Why was he letting this guy provoke him? You haven't answered my question, he asked after forcing himself to calm down. I've never done anything to my dear little Tomura. Then we're done here, All Might said, turned around and stood up. This would surely get him what he wanted. 𝗓𝗨 did like to hear himself talk. Oh no, no, no. Don't go just yet. I can think of something that might be of interest to you. 𝗓𝗨 suddenly begged, as All Might had predicted. The man known as the symbol of peace may have not been able to fight anymore, but he still had his skills, and he knew that 𝗓𝗨 liked to hurt him. Whatever he was going to hear would not be pretty, but it would help him in getting to know Tomura better. Get to the point. I have no other reason to stay here. All Might crossed his arms. Well, I don't really know what you want me to say. I have always been good to Tomura. He started. Sometimes, I starved him of affection for so long, he would use his quirk until complete exhaustion just to get my attention. He would vent a lot by training himself and his quirk, until he passed out, just to wake up with me waiting at his side and patting his head. 𝗓𝗨 sounded as if he was just speaking about the weather and not about manipulating a child. Isn't it ironic? I taught everything to him, so that he could become my heir, and he would do everything for me, so that he could feel better. Everything we exchanged seemed simply symbiotic. But he surpassed all of my expectations. He's not only my heir anymore, no, he's the next me. That dreadful smirk never left 𝗓𝗨's lips when he spoke, and All Might felt already sick and angry again just hearing that. Why would you care about him wanting your attention? You could have just taught him without bringing in human emotions. Why care about that? He did genuinely want to know what the man thought of his own apprentice. Isn't it obvious? I made him dependent. He couldn't help but obey my every command, fulfill my every wish. He killed dozens, no, hundreds for me, All Might. While he said that, his speech turned into an almost stereotypical evil laughter. All Might had trouble holding himself together. He just wanted to break that bulletproof glass separating the two and do what he never wished to do to anyone, take the man out of this world for good. Unfortunately, That wasn't possible, not even because All Might didn't have the strength to break anything remotely that strong anymore, but because 𝐴ll-for-One's fate didn't lie in his hands. So he settled on cursing him instead. You should burn in hell for what you've done, bastard. Don't be like that, All Might. I'm not as heartless as you think. I've become quite fond of my apprentice. I do care about his well-being. That day at 𝗵𝗵𝗄, when you beat me, was the best thing to ever happen to him. He became independent again, because his teacher went to a place he couldn't reach. That day at 𝗵𝗵𝗄 had also been the day that All Might had learned about Tomura's ancestry. Everything could have gone so different if 𝗏-for-One had never told him that. Or if Tomura wasn't Nana's grandchild to begin with. Would I care about him then? It is not me who only cares about your name, it's 𝗏-for-One. He had told that to Tomura, and he believed it true, but his mind seemed to like to challenge his own beliefs. Had I wanted, I could have easily abused him, like Shimura did, that useless spawn of your master. Tomura would have taken it all like the little pet he was. He still loves his father, even after all that suffering. 𝗏-for-One continued, and he looked especially satisfied. When All Might began to shake with fury, how he managed to actually see people without eyes was beyond the hero's comprehension. The way Tomura was attached to the hand he put over his face, affectionately calling it father, had always given away that he must have had an unusual and unhealthy relationship with his parent. So Nana's son really did abuse his own child. Why had the fact that Nana's had given him away caused such harm, even a mental damage? Thinking about Tomura, no, little Tenko Shimura getting abused, don't. This was a line he was not willing to cross yet. Not with 𝗏-for-One at least. He wanted Tomura to speak to him about it. If he never did, that was fine too. Those were a young man's painful memories. They only belonged to him, and it was his choice to do with them as he wanted. All Might would be the last to force him. We're done here. Please, All Might. Isn't there anything else you want to know? I could talk about how he started to enjoy killing, or about those many times he tried to use his quirk on himself, trying to get free from my chains. All Might felt as if he'd just been shot. Explain yourself. He shouted and felt his heartbeat speed up and his anger skyrocketing. Once you're part of our world, there's no going back. Who outside of the underground would ever accept him? Him, who had already murdered dozens of people at the tender age of 15. Even before that, no one would have ever wanted a child with such a destructive quirk. Don't you think he didn't know that? His only way out of my grasp was death. The words spoken aloud sounded like thunder in All Might's ears. You're wrong. He just needed a hand. His quirk would have been so helpful in many situations. He could have been a hero. All Might argued against the man, but then remembered Nana, who wanted to shield her family from villains and heroes alike. Still, she would have preferred her grandson becoming a hero over a villain anytime. Yes, maybe when your society needed it. Don't lie to me. You know he always would have been an outcast. All Might didn't know what to say to that, because he could easily imagine it being true. I killed my father and then I murdered my old self, Shimura Tenko. The world as it was didn't hold a place for a child who murdered his father, even if it had been by accident. Had it been by accident? It must have been. Why else would Tomura still cling to his father's hand? He never went through with it, and by the time he would have had the courage, he was already too addicted by his own dependence to me. Then I got put in here, and him having to think for himself was the catalyst for a completely new hate for you in society. Isn't that true, All Might? He must have hurt you all badly. All Might, it's time. A voice sounded through the speakers, and without saying another word, the hero stood up and walked towards the exit in fast paces. Unlike his visits with Tomura, he was glad to get out of here. You think you have him where you want him to be. But Tomura will never change. Everything is going as I've foreseen. 𝗏-for-One called towards All Might. He didn't look back once. All Might exited Tartarus just to get some fresh air. He was already feeling exhausted, and he needed to calm his heart before getting into Tomura's cell. Otherwise, the kid would immediately notice that something was up. But why shouldn't he know that you've just visited his master? Beside the point, that isn't allowed to know. They can't hear it on you. Then it was decided. He would break the rules and speak to Tomura about his visit with 𝗏-for-One today. But first, he needed to get through the whole entrance process all over again. Back on the lower floors, the young guard from the last Tuesday greeted him when he arrived at the block where Tomura's cell was. Hello, All Might, welcome back. Next to the guard stood a woman. All Might estimated that she must have been around his age. She had her dark brown hair up in a tight bun. Her blue eyes looked at him through some old-fashioned round glasses, and she wore a white lab coat. In her arm, she held a clipboard holding some sheets. I thought of it as a rumor, but here you are. It's nice to meet you, All Might. The woman bowed and introduced herself as one of Tomura's doctors. Apparently, she was responsible for the prisoner's physical health. It's good to meet you too. Tell me, doctor, how is he doing? He asked, and noticed the worry in his own voice. He was still shaken about what 𝗏-for-One had told him. Pull yourself together, Toshinori. Am I allowed to share my notes with All Might? The woman turned to the guard. He shrugged and asked a question in return. I don't see why not, but as a doctor, aren't you bound by an oath? There's nothing Shigaraki can really do about it, can he? she said. Then she turned to face All Might again. I have been informed that Shigaraki has been eating all of his meals these past days. This is really important, since he quickly needs to regain some strength. If he doesn't, there may be some long-term effects because of nutritional deficiency. She started and waited for some comment. I see, was all the hero could add. Whenever I visit him, we just do routine things like checking lungs, heart, eyes, etc. She then continued and went through her sheets while talking. He never talks but groans whenever I want to see the scars around his neck and arms, but today he was different. For the first time, I was able to take care of his wounds while he was still sober. That's good, isn't it? All Might looked at the guard and the doctor when he asked, and they both nodded reassuringly. Yes, I think so too. The doctor confirmed. It looks as if he's getting to terms with the situation he's in. I bet the therapists will have more luck with him starting from now on. That really was positive news for a change, and All Might felt relieved, especially after that wearing last visit and those horrible information he'd gotten. The guard then, as always, told him about the rules, and while he did, All Might watched the doctor add something to her notes. She was writing with one of those brightly colored, bendable pencils. He didn't even know that those were still a thing, remembering them from when he was a child. They used to be part of every writing kit in kindergarten or first grade, and he couldn't deny that the doctor looked kind of ridiculous while she was holding one of them. The pink, green, and blue-colored item just had that big contrast with her white sterile lab coat and that clean hairstyle. The hero smiled. What's so funny? She asked, looking up in just that moment. Caught. Nothing, really. I just haven't seen one of those pencils in a while, he explained, and the doctor's eyes wandered to the item she was holding in her right hand. That? Oh, you're right. We had quite the trouble finding them. They're not trendy anymore these days, she explained, and seemed highly amused by the item as well. Why would you need to find exactly those pencils? All Might couldn't help but wonder. It was the guard who answered his question. As you are aware, items that could be used as weapons are not allowed into the cell. Medical items are usually an exception, but the doctors are still asked to look for safer alternatives. You can't really harm someone with a bendable pencil. Normal writing tools, however, can be used to stab someone. All Might frowned. Why would Tomura stab you? Another slip-up. All Might bit his tongue. What was wrong with him today? Tomura, hm. The doctor repeated with a raised eyebrow and then looked at the guard, who barely shrugged as to say, what are you looking at me for? She stored the pencil into one of the pockets of her coat and put the clipboard underneath her arm. All Might, whatever you're doing by visiting Shigaraki is showing effect. He is changing, albeit I cannot say if that change is genuine. But even the people inside a high-security prison talk, and I already got wind of you getting closer to the prisoner. All Might didn't know where she was getting at. But he wasn't just going to let himself get attacked by a person he just had met. I have my reasons. The High Court is informed about all of my doing whenever I'm here. I therefore don't see why I should be judged by you or anyone else. He defended himself, rightfully, and the doctor seemed to regret her words, or at least the way she had told him. All I'm trying to say is that Shigaraki still is a very dangerous person. We are not going to risk our own lives by bringing in potential weapons into a cell where he could easily overpower and kill us, she explained, and the young guard nodded. I understand. He truly did. But this discussion had already gotten past that point. But I still don't see how any of this has to do with me getting, as you say, closer to the boy. I am not trying to be rude here, but you don't seem able to objectively evaluate the situation anymore. You literally just asked me why Shigaraki would stab us, as if it wasn't obvious, the doctor stated bluntly, rendering All Might speechless. Also, you might be interested in knowing that Shigaraki is not a boy anymore. It is hard to determine a person's exact age, but judging by his wisdom teeth, he has already left his teenage years behind. I'm guessing he's in his early 20s. Just a way of saying, I remember my early 20s, still very naive and childlike at that age. All Might had already assumed that Tomura was a few years older than Aizawa's and Vlad's students. All of the things he has done are evidence for the contrary. He's not a child anymore. Was this lady trying to pick a fight with him, or why else was she engaging with him and this time wasting verbal duel? She's right. Gran Torino is right too. They're all right. What am I trying to accomplish here? A voice in his subconscious speaking again. He remembered his last visit, when he embraced a shaking Tomura, who had not been able to defend himself, not been able to push All Might away. All of the hero's doubts had vanished into thin air at that moment. Yet they were back whenever someone confronted him about his beliefs in Tomura. There's no way I can morally justify what I'm doing. His own words back in the police car with Tsukachi and Gran Torino. A chance to save a child who has lost his way and bring him back to the light. Also his words in the same scene. Only a few seconds later, his heart speaking, he thought back to all those things All for One had said to him and came to the same conclusion. Tomura deserved a change, and All Might would be the one to give it him. He would guide him, he would save him. It was nice to meet you. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a prisoner to visit. He sealed the conversation and entered the cell. I am here. The villain hospital was unexpectedly dull, darker than hospitals All Might had seen, but still sterile, quiet, and really nothing out of the norm. Most of its patients didn't stay long enough to get such a good look at it as he did. As soon as they felt well again, they were put into prison. Tomura was not going to be an exception. He was asleep, 2 gunshot wounds healing beneath the bandages, one on his right arm, the other on his left shoulder. There was also a bandage around his head, which covered the stitched-up forehead wound, as well as some band-aids on his cheeks and arms. He was sweating heavily, his body heating itself in a fever to fight off the infections of his injuries. His wrists were tied to the sides of the bed with multiple zip ties, as were his ankles. Dangerous tools. Zip ties only tightened, but the doctors and nurses in here could not afford to show any mercy. It could cost them their job if they sympathized with their patients, all of them criminals or villains. It must have been a hard job, having to treat someone who was ready to at best just rob you, at worst kill you in your sleep. But that's what made a civilized society. And like police, women and men, these doctors and nurses deserve praise for what they did. Don't, please. Tomura's breath quickened. That's when he was dreaming. He was already on his 3rd dream, or rather nightmare, occasionally moaning something about his father not to hurt him. The former hero sat at the villain's side, his elbows resting on his knees and his face buried in his hands. He was exhausted and craved the sleep that didn't come to him. The clock on his phone told him that less than 2 minutes had passed since the last time he'd checked it, making it now 3:56 a.m. on a Saturday morning. His visit with Tomura at Tartarus had been only 18 hours ago, and he still remembered the moment he had walked into the cell after talking with the doctor. 18 hours earlier. Is it any good? All Might asked when he entered the cell and found Tomura reading one of the books he had brought him. The former leader of the League of Villains was lying on the floor, holding the book over his head in what looked like the most uncomfortable reading position All Might had ever seen. Tomura ignored him, instead finishing the page he was currently at, then placing the item next to him, sitting up and leaning his back against the wall. Father was placed over his face again, and All Might couldn't help but feel disappointed about it, although he knew that it meant that Tomura had been behaving. Neither the guard nor the doctor outside had mentioned that the prisoner had gotten back his favorite item. You're late. Tomura accused him and folded his arms like a spoiled child. There was no trace of the anxiety he had been giving off the last time. With Father on, he seemed to fall back into his villain leader role. Well, at least he greeted me. More or less. I was occupied. All Might tried to explain without giving anything away, hoping they could leave it at that. The doctor talked to you, didn't she? Tomura of course did not leave it at that. He was playing with the laces of his shoes while he asked that, and All Might felt annoyed and amused at the same time. His voice sounded arrogant and cunning but genuinely curious at the same time. Only Tomura managed to speak in such mixed emotions. You know I'm not allowed to answer that. He told him what the kid should have already known, and his eyes fell onto the book placed at his side. So, is it worth reading? It was recommended to me. I wouldn't know. The young man just shrugged, still looking at his red shoes. All Might nervously stepped from one foot to the other before forcing himself to sit down, debating on whether he really should break the rules regarding All for One. I need to confront him on this. I will have to do it eventually. Why not now? I visited All for One today. He just got right to the topic, and Tomura's eyes shot up, looking at him as what All Might had described as pure adoration. He whispered something the man couldn't make out, and there was a shimmer in Tomura's orbs he had never seen before. We talked about you, about your father, and shut up. Tomura interrupted him and bared his teeth behind the hand covering his face. Where there had been adoration, was now anger and rejection. Realizing that All Might read his face, he looked away again and hid the rest of it behind the hair. The former number 1 cursed himself for that 3rd slip-up this day and took a deep breath before continuing. He needed to fix this immediately. I'm sorry, young Tenko. He sincerely regretted mentioning that particular subject, hoping that Tomura would accept his apology. Stop calling me that. Tomura snapped and sank his fingertips into the sensitive flesh of scarred arms. Come again? All Might asked and frowned. Tomura didn't even hide that he was annoyed having to repeat what he just said. You know what I said. Don't call me that name. He growled into his father and sounded almost like an animal doing that. All Might passed his hand through his hair. All right, back to Tomura, I guess. You call me Toshinori then. He tried to find a mutual agreement, but Tomura just stayed silent, fidgeting nervously with his finger, trying to dig them into his arms, then realizing that it didn't cause the wished result. Going back to his laces, getting bored and trying to dig them into his skin again. I shouldn't have mentioned that. Let's just talk about something else, all right? He really wished he had just followed the rules, because the climate in the cell was feeling like it was already going in a wrong direction. His feeling proved him right. Yeah, of course. Just say it, All Might. Speak what's on your mind. Tomura snapped at him and his eyes burned, the red in his orbs matching the chucks All Might had gifted him more than ever. Just say what you gotta say. Shigaraki, calm down. Tomura flinched at the guard's voice echoing through the room. tired of digging his short nails into the thick skin of his arms. His hands shot up to scratch his neck. That didn't seem to work either, because he went straight to pulling his hair. Tomura, stop it. All Might ordered him, because he knew that if he didn't, this visit would be over before it had even begun. But Tomura had him completely shut out. He went on to pull at the sensitive skin around his eyes and making father fall of his face in the process, damaging his own face, and when All Might couldn't watch it any longer, he shot forwards, taking Tomura's wrists, one in each of his hands. The young man seemed shocked by that action, and for a moment, he just stared in disbelief, though he promptly regained himself, ripping his wrists out of the hero's hold, and then pushing the skinny blonde figure to the ground. Tomura's eyes erupted into a fire. Nana's grandson jumped up, buried his knee into the hero's stomach, and made him defenseless, holding his arms down. Shigaraki Tomura was hovering over him like a wild animal, ready to tear him into 1,000 pieces, and the symbol of peace knew for sure, had Tomura not been wearing those gauntlets at that moment, that the kid would have killed him. How many times had Tomura tried to kill him by now? Twice, even if what was happening right now was just a reflex because All Might had just taken his hands, the part of his body Tomura used his quirk with. How many times had the young man at least expressed the wish to murder him? All Might remembered the conversation he had just had with the doctor in front of Tomura's cell. Why would Tomura stab you? His own stupid words. Wasn't that obvious? Because he is a villain. Someone who wanted to hurt society for the sake of doing it. Because he takes enjoyment out of it. Because he was way past any sanity. Unlike his comrades, Tomura did only ever pretend to have idealistic goals. I think that you hate me because I couldn't save you from your fall. A fall too deep for All Might to reach. Dark like a new moon's night. Dark like the loneliest ocean, and Tomura was the anchor in it. An anchor relentlessly sinking, reaching for the bottom that never came. An anchor that was too heavy for All Might alone to bring back to the surface. Forgive me, Nana. I'm trying. But whenever I think that I've made some progress, I fall back again. It seems as if I really can't save anyone. For a moment, All Might felt far away. Proud, Toshinori. Proud of what? He felt like he hadn't managed a single thing since Nana died. I killed him. I murdered him in cold blood. Tomura yelled directly into All Might's panicked face, pulling the man back to reality. A younger man's lips were formed into a smile so wide it hurt to look at. All for one's protege giggled, his voice becoming high-pitched and reminding him of the day him and Kurogiri attacked you. They never wanted me. And now I don't need them. I don't need you. He let go of All Might's arms, reaching for his neck, an opening for All Might to fight back. And he took it, tossing Tomura off him. All Might then remembered his first visit, where he couldn't stand up against the villain. Had he become so much weaker in those few weeks? No, All Might had fought too many battles to know that Tomura didn't actually care to have the upper hand. He knew he didn't stand a chance. At the very last, when the guards entered, he just fought for entertainment. His giggling didn't stop when he fell onto his back, and he didn't try to fight it when All Might stepped onto his arms, holding him down with his own light weight. What are you saying? Why wouldn't I want you? How many times have I told you that I care about you? To All Might's surprise, the giggling stopped and Tomura's laugh quieted down. Silence prevailed for a few seconds, and All Might searched for the right words to interrupt it and to make his master's relative finally understand. But it was Tomura to eventually break the overwhelming quietness. His voice was calm when he spoke, but what he was about to say shook All Might to the very core. Then why couldn't you save me? The world around All Might was shut out. He didn't register the guards coming in. Neither did he hear Tomura screaming and struggling, nor did he realize that he was being guided outside of the high-security prison. He didn't even register getting into the rented car. Then why couldn't you save me? This all never would have happened if you would have just saved me, was what he had basically just said. He blames me for all the things he was forced to do. He blames me for not being able to ever live a normal life. It's all my fault. This is your fault. Tomura's words he had already thrown at All Might on the first visit. He had blamed himself for what had happened to Tomura, but not solely. To Tomura, however, there was only him to blame. Of course, why would he blame All for One, the man who had saved him? It's all my fault. Present after All Might had regained himself more or less. He had left the island of Tartarus. He didn't even remember what he did back home. Only that he received a call from his notary, informing him that Tomura had been brought into the villain hospital on the mainland. Apparently, had somehow been able to break the syringes the guards had tried giving him to calm him down, as well as broken one guard's arm and another one's jawbone. Panicking and seeing no other solution, one of them shot him twice. Tomura was then violently thrown to the ground, where had probably gotten that injury on his forehead from. All Might's notary had also informed him that this was Tomura's very last possibility for rehabilitation. If he misbehaves once again, they are going to strip him to a chair forever. He will lose all the humanity he has left. A shiver went down All Might's spine just thinking about it. There was still a chance. Don't give up. All Might checked the clock again. 4:05 a.m. He remembered checking 6 more times before he finally dozed off. It was a good and deep sleep, something he had needed after this accumulation of tiredness. So while his body still hurt after sleeping on a chair, his mind felt rested. When the man slowly opened his eyes, he expected to see Tomura still asleep. Instead, the lad was awake and a red blush graced his cheekbones, still showing the fever he had. And Tomura was crying. Tears were running down his wrinkly tempes and he sobbed very quietly, almost inaudible, becoming a child again in All Might's eyes. His vision looked blurry. All Might cleared his throat and Tomura's eyes shot towards him, that blurriness vanishing instantly. When he realized that All Might was awake, he turned his head to the other side, trying to hide from his gaze and wiping the tears onto the bed sheets. He also pulled at his restraints, but all he managed to do was to cut into the skin at his wrists and ankles. Tomura was stronger than he looked, but in this state, his physical strength would be the least of their concerns. "Tomura, what do you want from me?" he hissed between his teeth and seemed to regret that his voice sounded this pathetic. The boy immediately bit his lip so hard, it started to bleed. No doubt he was forcing himself to stop tearing up, obviously failing miserably. "You better listen to what I have to say right now." All Might tried to speak calmly but authoritative. The topic was serious and could decide the rest of Tomura's life, whether he would ever see the blue sky again or spend his time stripped in a chair. "They're fed up with you, all of them." It was blunt but true. There was no reason to beat around the bush, like they were not before all of this, he said and grinned, still taking it all as a joke. Tomura was sad to look at, with his crude smile and the wet, red eyes. His wide smirk disappeared when he saw that All Might kept a straight face. "I mean it. Whatever you do from now on, be it only to scream at one of the guards, will take away the last of the freedom you've enjoyed until now." "They're not joking." Tomura closed his eyes as if it could shut out the truth while blood dripped from his lip down to his chin. All Might stood up and walked up to the table next to Tomura's bed, taking one of the paper tissues placed there. "Will you stay still so I can wipe that off?" he asked and awaited Tomura's reaction. The young villain opened his eyes again and looked up at him. He didn't answer, just extended his jaw, and All Might slowly took a hold of his face and carefully patted the blood away. He expected his skin to be dry and rough, and it definitely was around his eyes where his thumb rested, but the rest of it was surprisingly smooth. "That wasn't so bad now, was it?" he asked and threw the used tissue away, sitting back onto his chair, but Tomura had his face the other way again. He sighed. "I will never hurt you, Tomura." "Why mention him then?" the villain accused him, still looking away and talking toward the wall. "All for one?" All Might asked and was met with a shake of the head. "I see," he whispered, understanding that Tomura was talking about his father. "I didn't mention him for the purpose of talking about it. I actually had made up my mind not to ever touch on that subject unless you wanted me to." "Lies," the younger one yelled and pulled at the restraints again, hurting himself more in the process. How did he still have the energy to fight after being shot twice? A new wave of tears flushed his eyes and there was no denying it anymore. That Shigaraki Tomura was sobbing like a child. "I hate you." His words felt genuine and it still pierced All Might's heart to hear them, but he understood now. He stood up and walked back to the table next to the villain's bed, taking 2 of the plastic cups and filling them up with water of the sink at the other side of the room. While doing that, he could feel Tomura's eyes following him everywhere. Turning around, Tomura turned his head again. All Might sighed and walked back to the side of his bed, where he held the cup in front of the restrained figure's face. Tomura looked up from the corners of his eyes and grit his teeth. "It's all right. Hate me all you want if it makes you feel any better," he said, and Tomura turned around to look at him. "Because I still want to carry this burden with you. It depends on whether you let me." Tomura was confused and All Might was sure he was frowning, although he couldn't really say, since half of his head was in a bandage. Why won't you just let me rot in here?" he demanded to know, and the former number 1 wasn't surprised to hear that. To Tomura, none of this made sense. Why would the one who hadn't come to save him want to help him now? Why was this man, the man he had learned to hate the most, standing here trying to reach through to him? Was all he had learned from All for One been so wrong? "I thought it was because of Nana. But it's more, I wasn't there when you needed me. You already know that not everything All for One had taught you was the truth, young Tomura. You can keep denying it and letting your fears get the better of you, or you can face the hard truth and start to live again." Tomura then raised his head as high as he could and All Might reached down to support it at his neck. His long hair felt soft like feathers in the former hero's hand. He slowly put the cup to Tomura's lips, letting him drink until it was empty, then went on to empty his own. The young villain turned his head after that, a streak of pinkish red flowing his cheeks. That didn't look like it came from the fever. All Might ignored it. He had already assumed that even such simple things as helping someone drink would be highly intimate for the young man. Tomura didn't let himself get touched by anyone. All for One's apprentice fell back asleep soon after that. He didn't wake up even when the nurses came to check in on him. Around lunchtime, All Might was asked leave. He stood up and gently brushed away the strands of hair hanging into Tomura's face. Even at the foreign touch, Tomura was in such a deep slumber that he didn't reek. "It's all right now, I am here. Not hiding anymore later that day, All Might found himself in his apartment, resting on his couch and casually zapping through the limitless number of television channels, not being able to think about anything but his night and the following morning at the villain hospital. On his drive back home, his notary had tried to call him again. All Might had not been able to take the call, so the man had left a message instead, telling him that his request on muting the microphones on his visits had just been abolished. Additionally, the number of visits had been cut back to twice a month instead of twice a week, and no gifts were allowed to be brought in anymore. The man didn't say anything about the items All Might had already given to Tomura. He also didn't mention the hand. But All Might assumed that all of it would be taken away from the prisoner as well. That was understandable, and he wished things had gone different. How would that visit have gone if he hadn't mentioned All for One at all? He knew he was partially at fault, but he was convinced that something like this would have happened anyway, maybe on his next visit or the one after that, but still unavoidable in the end. Villain Hospital. We didn't know All Might's work well. His ears picked up from a channel he had just passed, and All Might jumped. He went back and was shocked to see what the news was showing. Pictures of him walking out of the villain hospital, taken only a few hours ago. Next thing was one of the nurses he had seen in the hospital hallway being interviewed. She looked very young, not much older than the students at UA, and therefore still inexperienced, unable to properly cope with the questions she was bombarded with by all the journalists. What is an important personality like All Might doing at the villain hospital? A woman asked. I'm afraid I ca. She tried to answer, only to be interrupted by another reporter. Is it true that he is visiting Shigaraki Tomura, a man that was one of Japan's most wanted criminals? I wasn't finished. She wasn't able to answer the second one either, and the questions just kept coming. Shigaraki Tomura apparently was beaten by 2 students of UA, the school All Might used to teach at. Why do you think he visits him? Was the hero killer stain ever in this hospital too? Is there any connection between 𝗬𝗲𝗺 and Endeavor? Why is Shigaraki Tomura in this hospital? Shouldn't he be in jail? Suddenly, 𝐒𝐭𝐴ZZ came swinging in out of nowhere, landing in front of the reporters and shielding the young woman from the pushing journalists while they both got back into the hospital building. While the cameras filmed them until the doors closed, All Might could still hear people cry for any kind of information. Tell us, miss, just a thing. All Might's phone suddenly rang. It was Gran Torino. He must have been watching the news too. Hello, he responded. Have you lost your mind, Toshinori? How could that happen? Gran Torino yelled into the phone with his raspy old voice, and All Might flinched at his old master scolding him once again. After all these years, one could think he was used to it by now. We should meet up. I need to start from the very beginning, and I don't think this line is safe. I'll be at your place by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Is that all right? All Might asked. You better bring some good explanation with you, Toshinori. Gran Torino hung up, clearly enraged about the situation, and All Might couldn't blame him. He was going to bring an explanation, but he was not sure it was as good as Gran Torino wanted it to be. First, however, he needed to get some time for himself, digest everything that had happened, and get some sleep. The news had already passed on to the weather when he turned the TV off. A comfortable quiet spread. Hopefully not the calm before the storm. It was to expect that journalists and paparazzi would now try to follow his every step more than ever. He needed to be careful. He was used to the public and the media always wanting something from him, always in a good way though. Now, according to them, he finally had skeletons in the closet and they would cling onto it like bees to honey. All Might stood up and walked into the kitchen. He had no appetite, but compromised with himself that he still needed to eat something and settled on a big protein bar. After forcing it down, he let out a cup of coffee and sat at the table, sighing heavily as he ran through the day and his last visits with Tomura for the he didn't know how manyth time. Why couldn't you save me? Why couldn't I? A knocking at the door pulled him out of his thoughts. Great, he murmured when he tiptoed towards it, and although he doubted this was a journalist, reminding himself that his apartment was on UA ground where they did not have any access to, right now he still didn't feel like talking to anyone. All Might, a young voice cried as soon as he had opened it. Young Midoriya and young 𝗵𝘃𝗃. He greeted them. His own apprentice looked agitated, stepping nervously from one foot to the other, while 𝗵𝘃𝗃 just leaned at the wall, arms crossed and nose wrinkled up. 𝗵𝘃𝗃, like he lives and breathes. What are you kids doing here? Shouldn't you be in school? He asked and simultaneously checked the watch on his phone. It was the middle of the afternoon. Both of them should have still been in hero course, even on a Saturday. Mr. Aizawa and number 13 were supposed to teach us this afternoon, but they had to be somewhere. Midoriya explained and looked to the ground. It was clear that he wanted to speak about something else but didn't know how to start. He then raised his head to look at 𝗵𝘃𝗃 for support, but the young blonde didn't leave his red eyes of All Might and the former pro hero felt judged. I can see you want to tell me something, young 𝗵𝘃𝗃. All Might asked him. It was Midoriya who answered. We saw the news today. It's everywhere. They're saying Shigaraki is at the hospital and that you were there too. What happened? All Might gulped. Was his own apprentice going to judge him now as well? No, Midoriya sounded concerned, not reproachful. He couldn't say the same about 𝗵𝘃𝗃. Other than his judging eyes, the kid was unreadable. "Come in, both of you." The skinny man then invited them, stepping aside. They did as asked and took place on the couch in the living room. All Might sat down opposite to them and folded his hands. How am I going to explain this to them? With Gran Torino, it wouldn't be so much the discretion he had to keep as to not wanting to talk about what had triggered Tomura. With them, it really was the discretion and not wanting to drag them into something. Midoriya and 𝗵𝘃𝗃, as well as all the other famous pro-heroes, had been crowded by journalists ever since they had beaten Tomura, only really able to freely walk around on Ua ground. The public had never been informed which students specifically had been responsible for the deed of bringing Japan's most searched villain behind bars, but journalists seemed to have a source of information everywhere. Even on Ua ground, it seemed. His students didn't have to carry All Might's secrets as well. Knowing too much could get him and them into legal trouble. He needed to protect them. So what was he going to tell them? Just let them talk first. Is there anything you want to tell or ask me? Anything you'd want to see from my perspective? Why, All Might. It was now 𝗵𝘃𝗃 speaking, his voice as raw and powerful as his personality, but there was a hint of disappointment All Might could filter out. Why, yes, that summoned up all he had done these past weeks. Why won't you just let me rot in here? Shigaraki's family has been a big part of my life. I blame myself for the way he has become. So, it's true then. He really visited that guy in the hospital? 𝗵𝘃𝗃 wanted to hear it from his mouth, but All Might just managed to nod. That creep tried to kill us, multiple times. And you're saying you visit him in the hospital? When was the last time you visited one of the clowns in our class whenever they had an injury? The explosive student instantly lost his cool and became loud. "Catch-in." Midoriya tried to calm him, calling his childhood friend by his nickname, which made Mr. King Explosion Murder only more furious. "Shut the fuck up, Deku. Don't you dumbass get what's going on?" Even though 𝗵𝘃𝗃 would have never admitted it, he was looking for Midoriya supporting him, confused on why his friend didn't seem angry at the symbol of peace. Midoriya looked at All Might, asking with a facial expression for permission to talk, to reveal that the news wasn't really news to him. All Might nodded again and student looked back at his angry classmate. "Catch-in, I already knew that." "What?" 𝗵𝘃𝗃's voice dropped and he was visibly confused. Looking from Midoriya to All Might and back to Midoriya, "What did you fucker say?" "You knew." "What exactly have you known, Deku?" "I told young Midoriya about me visiting Shigaraki in jail. It wasn't that long ago." All Might answered for his apprentice, but couldn't finish because of 𝗵𝘃𝗃's shouting and attempt to kill the dark-haired teen interrupted him. "In jail? Fucking 𝗬𝗂𝐴𝑘𝑢. Why didn't you tell me? I'm gonna kill you." "Calm down, young 𝗵𝘃𝗃. Don't tell me what to do, All Might." Although the younger blonde did bawl at All Might, he did calm down, letting go of the other teen's collar, then turned back to Midoriya. "Then why the fuck are you here, Deku? Don't tell me you're here because you're seriously concerned for that hand creep." Midoriya's freckled cheeks turned a light peach and he shrugged his shoulders. "Well, kinda," he managed to say before 𝗵𝘃𝗃 grabbed his collar again. "Enough, 𝗵𝘃𝗃." All Might's voice now stern and 𝗵𝘃𝗃 grumbled something before he let go and sat back, crossing his legs and his arms with a pissed temper. "I have disappointed you, both of you." All Might took a deep breath before continuing. "You're right, 𝗵𝘃𝗃. I could have been a better teacher, a better hero. What I'm doing is sending out certain signals, I know that." Midoriya opened his mouth to say something. However, All Might raised his hand to stop him. He wasn't done. The villain world out there now has seen that if someone like Shigaraki doesn't have it as bad, with the symbol of peace even visiting him in the hospital, why would they if they happen to get in jail? The public most likely will never approve of what I'm doing, and that's fine. But to me, this is the right thing. I know you all have a feeling of revenge towards the League of Villains. I get it. But where would this world go if we, as professional heroes, would listen to those kinds of feelings? What signal would that send? I am at fault that Shigaraki has become like this, and I will set things right. 𝗵𝘃𝗃 just snorted. "All Might, what happened?" Midoriya asked again, genuinely concerned about Tomura's well-being but only got a shake of the head. "I hope one day, when Tomura is allowed to see the blue sky again, he'll tell it to you himself." He used the villain's first name on purpose, showing the affection he held for the young man to them, an affection that grew stronger with every additional visit. Around 1.5 months later, Tomura was put back into Tartarus, and shortly after, All Might was allowed to visit him there. Gran Torino had originally planned on accompanying him, but had different plans the last moment. They hadn't seen each other since their last meeting, when they had met up to discuss what had happened that made All Might come out of the villain hospital. He didn't hide anything, not the gifts he had brought Tomura, not what he had spoken about with All for One, and he broke his own vow, not to speak about Tomura's father but with the kid. After that, he told him about the villain hospital and about talking with his students. Gran Torino had either nodded or shook his head but had never said anything until All Might had completely finished speaking. And then, he hadn't said much. "You're too far gone now, Toshinori. If you don't manage to reach him now, it will leave a hole in your chest that will never heal." The days and weeks following that event had been pleasantly quiet. He had managed to avoid the media pretty well, but other pro-heroes, especially those teaching at UA, had sought to speak to him as well. He ended up having a conversation with all of the teachers, Principal Nezu as the head. He did tell them about his visits to Tomura, although he had kept a lot of details to himself, never mentioning All for One or any other things concerning the prison and the island it was standing on. The mouse had then complimented him for his efforts and encouraged him to keep going. Yamada had supported him as well. Aizawa hadn't said anything at all, and the other pro-heroes had just looked unsure throughout the whole conversation. Still, they had come to the mutual agreement to tell the media, whenever confronted by them, that All Might was working on an investigation they didn't know anything about. Soon, the whole subject had become uninteresting, with the public thinking All Might had only visited Tomura to further his investigation concerning a crime, and with every passing day, less and less media outlets talked about it anymore. Today was Christmas Eve, and on the way to the island, All Might had passed endless trees decorated with colorful Christmas baubles, shopping windows full of fairy lights, and young couples strolling in the streets, probably having dinner and then exchanging gifts. After Nana had been killed, All Might had spent some time in the US, where Christmas held a different meaning than here in Japan. He had also been in Europe, where every country seemed to have its own traditions regarding it, sometimes celebrating it a few days later than what they were used to. Midoriya was going to spend the evening with someone special as well, although he hadn't said with whom. All Might did have a few people in mind, but hadn't pushed the subject, not wanting the teen to feel embarrassed. Light snow fell from the gray sky. The streets seemed empty and the world around him quiet. For only 1 second, he felt as there was no more evil in this world. I want you to see the good things in this world, Tomura. In the elevator to the lower levels of Tartarus, All Might felt his heart beat faster than usual. Something big was going to happen today. He could feel it. When he arrived at the block, the guard didn't even notice him. He was staring through the little window into the cell and had his surroundings completely shut out. It was a man All Might hadn't seen yet. "Hello," he greeted, and the man just waved at him, advising him to come look into the cell as well. All Might frowned but did as asked, placed himself next to the man, looking through the glass. Inside, Tomura sat face to face with another guard All Might didn't know either. In front of each of them laid a Chinese tangram, a puzzle consisting of 7 flat shapes. Next to them was a book showing a default shape. They were playing against each other. Whoever was able to lay his shape according to the default one first would win. And Tomura beat the guard at every single one, laying the shapes with his left hand only. He was fast, taking just a quick look at the book, then immediately creating the default shape, and he looked like he was enjoying himself too. Then, there was a short horn-like sound, and the guard inside started packing all the flat shapes and the book into a box and left the cell without saying a word. Tomura didn't move from his place, just lowered his head and hid behind the hair. After the greetings and the rules, in which he was informed again that there was no muting of the microphones anymore, he asked them about the game. Shigaraki has been impeccable these past days in here, as well as the weeks he spent at the hospital. His lawyer has therefore requested for him to have some sort of entertainment for half an hour once a week. Volunteers are not allowed into Tartarus, therefore the job gets stuck with us. The man who had played the game explained, followed by him smiling. "You don't mind doing it?" "Not at all. It makes our job more interesting too." The other guard who had been watching them through the window answered instead. "Last week, when he had more trouble moving, we showed him some Rebuse puzzles and he solved them one after the other." "I see." He thanked the guards and entered the cell. "Hello." To All Might's surprise, Tomura greeted him first. Not only that, but for the very first time in a way that was normal. He didn't look up and his voice had something unusually timid about it. All Might liked to believe that this were glimpses of a personality he would have developed if he hadn't been taken by All for One. "It's good to see you again, young Tomura." All Might greeted him back and sat down where the guard had sat only minutes before. That was quite impressive. He started the conversation, and luckily, that got Tomura to raise his head and look at him with the softest his scarlet eyes could be. His forehead was mostly covered by his hair, so All Might couldn't see how well the stitches had healed. "The game, I mean. You were watching. Only the last 3 or 4 rounds." All Might admitted. "You like games a lot, don't you?" "Yes," came the short answer, and Tomura smiled. Not the creepy evil villain smirk that was too wide to be human. It was a real smile, a childish smile, a smile that could have made someone out there fall in love with him. Like Midoriya, he could have spent Christmas Eve having dinner, exchanging a gift or two, looking at the fairy lights in the shopping windows and the big colorful baubles hanging on the trees, and if the weather was nice, enjoying the view at Mount Fuji. "How are your wounds?" All Might asked before he lost himself in his thoughts and earned what looked like it was supposed to be a shrug. "Does it hurt?" A slow nod. "Are you feeling okay?" He tried again, and something unreadable flashed in those red orbs. His happy mimic changed into a depressive one in a flash. "Tomura, have them kill me. I want to die. Please." Tomura breathed and bit his lip for pleading like that. By now, All Might knew that the young villain hated nothing more than showing his human emotions, from admitting his feelings so openly, when he knew they were being listened to, could have been meaning only one thing: he couldn't take any of this anymore. "You don't have to hide from me, Tomura." All for One's apprentice slowly rose his hand and tried to scratch at his neck, but his facial expression showed that it hurt too badly for him to do it. Pinching his eyes together, he bit down on his lip again, making himself bleed once more. It reminded All Might back to that set at the villain hospital, where Tomura had let him wipe off that mess of his chin. This time, Tomura stood up himself. Shaky on his legs, like a newborn calf, he slowly walked towards the sink to grab the paper towels and then wiped it off. When he turned back, All Might had stood up as well, standing only 3 feet away. They were both tall, and Tomura would have been even taller if it wasn't for his bad posture. "Tomura, didn't I already tell you it's too late?" It wasn't anger with which Tomura spoke, it was despair. All Might had been a hero long enough to know that under that surface, he was just someone calling for help. But he couldn't see himself anymore. Too lost in the darkness All for One had led him into. Too lost to find the way back to the light. But not too lost for someone else not to find him. "It's not too late. You have to trust me. I will help you." A chance to save a child who has lost his way and bring him back to the light. "And no matter how much you're fighting it, no matter how much you hate me, I will save you from the darkness. I think that you hate me because I couldn't save you from your fall. I can't." Tomura's eyes were wet with tears again, and he was visibly fighting to keep them in, trying to accomplish that by going back to his League of Villains persona. "I will tear down this world. First this jail, and then all of you. And I will do it all with my own hands. I don't need these other fools." He put all his anger into these words. But to All Might it was nothing more than an empty threat. He had seen Tomura at his worst, at his most defenseless. He knew what he had to do. "Shimura Nana, your grandmother. She was like a mother to me." At the mentioning of his family name, Tomura looked away, avoiding All Might's eyes at all costs as he carefully patted the bruise on his lip with that paper towel. "I'm sorry I couldn't be to you what you needed me to be back then." The blonde stepped forwards and gently took a hold of Tomura's shoulders, the villain still not looking at him. Nana's grandson was 1 or 2 inches smaller than the hero, but with his back like that he was small enough for All Might to place his chin on the young man's head. And he did, without asking. "We may not share the same blood, and we never will." All Might raised his hand to the back of Tomura's head, carefully pushing it towards him while Tomura's fluffy hair caressed that wrinkly skin of his hand. "But if you ever need someone to be a father to you, a father that won't hurt you, I'll be there." When All Might's shirt became wet with tears, he knew that Tomura finally didn't hide anymore. Fallen angel, what had he done? He had cried. He had cried like a child. Not only that, but into All Might's shirt nonetheless. What had he done? What the hell was wrong with him? What's the next pathetic thing I'm going to do in front of him? In front of all of them? He was disgusted by himself, by that weakness he had shown, and he cursed the cameras, the microphones, and everyone that had been watching and listening to them. How could he have been so oblivious, so naive? He should have known better. He had been taught by the best. How could he not have known better? Stupid, stupid Tomura. But the worst thing was yet to come. He couldn't even deny that All Might holding and comforting him had felt good. It had felt so good. It had felt like everything Tomura had been looking for his whole life was just there, like all his wishes, whatever they were about, had been fulfilled at once. If All Might would have just pushed him away, if the symbol of peace would have just been as fake and evil as All for One had said he was, all of this would be easier. Tomura could just continue to hate him like he had been doing for the most part of his life. Instead, he kept being thrown back to that moment All Might had placed his chin on him, the moment the man had softly touched his hair with his hand, with those long and skinny fingers of his that were just like Tomura's, the moment he had pushed his head towards his chest. They had then spent the rest of the visit in silence, with Tomura quietly crying into All Might's clothing and the hero just holding him, slowly stroking circles on his bony back. When the guards had called time, All Might had softly pushed the younger man away, looking at him with a smile. Even with those sunken and dark eyes and that jejune blonde hair, everyone could still see who he was because of that smile. It was too bright for Tomura to take in, so he had averted his eyes and looked at the ground. At this point, he wasn't going to deny that All Might really cared for him. The fact opposed everything he had learned about the man. However, he still couldn't let go of his own feelings. Feelings of anger and abandonment that were engraved into his bones. Did he want to let go of them? He felt so torn about everything. How could he even know what he wanted anymore? "Tomura," the man then had asked, but Tomura had ignored him, still looking to the ground, not wanting to take in the light that was All Might, then suddenly feeling a rough hand touching his cheek and wiping away the wetness his tears had caused. And Tomura, unfocused like he had been, had leaned into the touch, like a pet, like a child. How disgusting and weak. His skin crawled at the thought, not even because of the hero touching him, but because he hadn't fought it. Why hadn't he fought it? What would his sensei do if knew? Where's your fucking dignity? Why was he letting these people do with him as they pleased? But if you ever need someone to be a father to you, a father that won't hurt you, I'll be there. All Might's words just didn't leave his ears, his brain, his heart. Those had been the words which had pushed Tomura to his limits, ripped down the barrage that had held back his tears. The more he repeated them in his head, the more wrong they felt. Wrong, wrong, so wrong, yet so warm, safe, and home-like. Father, someone he could turn to, someone he could bond with, someone who would never get tired of teaching him throughout his whole life, someone who would always be there for him, no matter the time, no matter the distance, someone who would support him in his decisions or stop him from doing the things that harmed him and his surroundings, someone who would accept him the way he was, someone who would love him the way he was. Your father didn't love you. He didn't want you. Neither did your mother. Shut up. He ordered his brain and clenched his fists, causing the healing wounds to hurt. You're still wearing his hand because you're fucked in the head. Could his anxiety just stop talking to him? He couldn't think about his parents. It would only stir up additional bad feelings he just had no power to deal with right now. This isn't the first time you've embarrassed yourself in front of that man. Remember the hospital? He saw you crying there too and you let him touch you, not once but twice. Remember what you asked him before you were brought to the hospital? You've shown him all your weaknesses. Sensei would be so disappointed. Tomura groaned at himself, hoping it would scare away that part in his brain that wouldn't stop talking about all these things he wanted to forget. At least you're a tiny bit closer to getting freedom again. Just build some more trust. They've stopped drugging you since you came back. Just behave and it will all play out. That was the thing though. Tomura didn't want to play this game anymore. He was tired of lying, tired of fighting. Yes, he did want to get out. It was driving him mad staying in here. But he felt as if had no energy left to achieve that goal. Why couldn't they just kill him? Was this their way of torturing him? Locking him up until he became even more insane than he already was? As if that was possible, you disgusting fucking freak. Since the day he was injured, he had just enjoyed behaving, blaming it on his wounds. Not being able to do anything but sleep most of the times had its appeal. It didn't feel as if he was wasting time. Then his lawyer had even gotten these dumb guards to play games with him. How had he achieved that? Especially after All Might had told Tomura at the villain hospital that the people were just waiting for him to do something stupid again, so that they could restrain him to a chair and lock him up for good. Had All Might lied? Who was that lawyer guy anyway? He hadn't even met him once those past months. Wasn't he supposed to meet with Tomura in here on a regular basis? But if you ever need someone to be a father to you, a father that won't hurt you, I'll be there. Why couldn't he just stop thinking about it? He's nothing to you. You hate him. He ruined Sensei's face. Tomura tried to convince himself and to go back to the pure hatred, without success. Had Sensei ever been like a father to him? No, not really. To his master, he had been a tool. He knew that. He just didn't care enough to question it. Sensei had saved him, given him everything he had desired. Why would he question his motives? But how would Tomura have turned out if it hadn't been for him? What a stupid fucking question. You would have been dead. There is no you without Sensei. All for one gave you life. Tomura ignored the voice in his head and tried to really think about it. It was challenging, as if he was discovering something forbidden, something he should never think about. He knew that he would have been more timid, a characteristic Sensei had purged from him. He had liked flowers a lot too, and animals, but he would never admit to that today. Tomura cringed about himself, at how fucking embarrassing that thought was. The leader of the League of Villains, weak for the eyes of some dumb puppy. Also, flowers. Really, what was he, some naive little girl? Flowers. There had not been any flowers around his childhood home. The garden had been a neglected wasteland, empty like his father's soul, gray like the inside of their home. No decor but the bottles of alcoholic liquids Tomura would enjoy drinking today. Back then, however, they had only been the cause for so much pain. It hurts. Don't think about it. Stop, please. Don't think about it. He ordered himself, but the pictures kept coming and Tomura tried to ignore them, tried to push them away, to think about something else, but the only other thoughts his brain allowed him were All Might comforting him. What was it going to be? All Might or his father? But if you ever need someone to be a father to you, a father that won't hurt you, I'll be there. All Might comforting him. His father pulling his hair. All Might stroking circles on his back. His father slapping him across his face. All Might wiping the tears of his cheeks. His father starving him. All Might wiping the blood away of his busted lip. His father choking him until all he saw was black. All Might placing his chin onto his head. Disgrace. You're a disgrace. Please, Daddy, stop. His heart was racing and he started to feel dizzy. It was too difficult to breathe and suddenly, his chest hurt so bad it even faded out the pain of his gunshot wounds. Calm down. Calm down. Calm down. His orders didn't work. His brain wasn't listening. He was losing control. He was losing control. He was dying, was going to die. Tomura tried to breathe but his lungs didn't fill. The thoughts raced in his brain. All Might, Father, Sensei, League of Villains, hate, decay, kill, Father, stop, stop, stop. Please. His teeth were grinding hard on another, making his jaw hurt, but he still managed to push the words trough, please. His begging seemed to work. Someone entered the room. He couldn't tell who and he didn't remember much, just that he was forced to swallow something that calmed him down in a matter of minutes. Right now, he couldn't care less about how pathetic he looked. He just wanted all of this to stop. I want to die. Don't walk in front of me, half and half bastard. No one who had met him could ever forget Bakugo's voice or choice of vocabulary. He was truly unique in every aspect. But who was he talking to? Half and half. That must have been Todoroki. Don't be like that, Kacchan. Only Midoriya called Bakugo like that. Shut the fuck up, Deku. Why are you so angry all the time, Bakugo? That was Bakugo's close friend, Kirishima, always a grin on his face. Nobody asked for you fucking opinion, bad hair. All Might was waiting right next to the classroom's door when the students walked out, all of them respectfully greeting him before heading towards the exit. All Might, young Midoriya, long time no see. The skinny man greeted his apprentice. They were already a week into January and had not seen each other since the day before Christmas Eve. What are you doing here? Midoriya asked as they both exited the building together. Most of the snow had already melted away, but the temperature was still freezing and Midoriya dug a hat out of his jacket, his dark hair disappearing underneath it as he pulled it over his head. I thought you might have time for me after class. The symbol of peace said, we haven't talked in a while and I wondered if you'd care to join me for some hot chocolate at my apartment. The student didn't take long to answer that. At the man's place, All Might prepared the hot chocolate first, as promised, and then sat opposite to Midoriya, speaking with the teenager about all kinds of things. First about One for All, then about the coming exams the hero in training was currently preparing himself for. Midoriya had always been a good student, diligent and hungry for information. That hadn't changed to this day and it was impossible for him to fail, All Might was sure. After that the man addressed Midoriya's Christmas Eve evening, but the student dodged the topic, obviously still too embarrassed to reveal any details about his. Was it a significant other already? The kid wouldn't even tell him that. All Might had not planned on talking any more about Tomura or Tartarus in general, but it was Midoriya who addressed it after finishing his cup. All Might, Shigaraki, I mean. The kid bit his lip, unsure about the choice of words, but then settled on a simple how is he. I shouldn't talk with you about this. It could get us both into legal trouble. All Might explained, but was willing to reveal at least a tiny bit of information, but he is doing all right, at least physically. I see, Midoriya said and lowered his head. Young Midoriya. All Might spoke up after finishing his cup as well. Now that we're on this topic, I have a confession to make. I've been having a bad conscience regarding you. Midoriya raised his head to meet All Might's eyes and frowned. What do you mean? These past few months, I only had my mind on Tomura. I've been completely neglecting you and I wanted to apologize. What are you saying, All Might? The teen opposite to him asked with a genuinely confused look. Right now, Shigaraki needs you more than I do. Please don't apologize. Young Midoriya. All Might tried again. When I told you that day at Kamino that it was your turn now, I didn't mean to just leave it all to you. I still need to guide you, just like Nana guided me. I am so proud of what you've become and I want to accompany you to the day you get your professional license and beyond. There was a glitter in Midoriya's orbs and he looked like that 15-year-old boy again. Will you let me be your teacher again? Surprisingly, the student really seemed to think about it, despite what he had said before. I still don't think there's any reason to apologize. But yes, of course I want you to be my teacher again. All Might smiled, a stone falling from his heart. But I have a request. It was blunt, direct and unlike Midoriya, and All Might found himself unprepared for what was about to come. What's that? I want to visit Shigaraki. All Might's face lost all color. I want to help too. Please. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down. That ancient serpent called the devil, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. A hand caressed his head. Don't you think that sounds beautiful, Tomura? All for One asked from on the sofa, gently turning the thin page of the book in his lap with the hand he had just touched the younger villain's head with. Tomura rarely saw his sensei anymore. Most of the time, the man was connected to a machine with the doctor keeping him company, looking for different quirks they could use to further the healing process. All for One then communicated with Tomura through either the computer set up in the bar or the one in the teen's room. This was one of the rare occasions All for One just wanted to spend some time with him. At least that's what he had said. No assignments or exercises, but Tomura still felt like he was being tested when the man asked him questions like that one. Not really, the teen answered, his eyes fixed on the big screen before them. He was playing an action RPG, ironically one with a dragon ruling the earth. The fair-haired boy briefly wondered if that text passage may have been the inspiration for it, but assumed the creators just had copied another medium. Having read a handful of fantasy books and played hundreds of video games of the sort, he knew that all of it was more or less the same. They were either all inspired by the same source or just copied one another. No one was really creative anymore. But then again, there's only so much stories one could do. Any further explanation? His sensei asked, just proving Tomura's point that the man was testing him. Nah, was the kid's short answer. Not in the mood to do any of that. It reminds me a lot of us. Tomura paused his game and turned to look at the speaking black mask. How? All for one smiled behind it, satisfied with Tomura's natural curiosity. God, the one to give quirks, the one to take them away. All for one, he gave Lucifer, the angel he loved, his little brother, everything that he desired. But Lucifer, the holder of one for all and his army of angels, the army of heroes, rebelled against him and a war broke out. A war that will hold on until the moment God sends out Michael, his archangel, his apprentice, who shall lead God's armies to fight the one who betrayed him. And Michael will defeat the hero and his fallen angels. The teen stared at him for a few seconds, before telling him that he didn't see it, turning back to his game. That's too bad. I hoped you'd learn to appreciate a comparison as poetic as this. That's not poetic, it's just crap, he said while finally beating that annoying last boss of the dungeon. All for one placed his hand on the teen's head again. The student stopped pressing the buttons on his controller when his teacher intertwined the fingers of his big hand with the messy silver hair, unintentionally massaging the dry scalp. It felt good, relaxing, and in moments like these, Tomura completely forgot that he hated any kind of physical contact. He felt like in trance, until he disintegrated the item he was holding. The young villain looked down at his own hands, now covered in dust. A message popped up on the screen, telling him to reattach the controller. Great, he murmured and decided to immediately get a new one. 𝗬𝗓𝐻𝐵 Ward shopping mall would surely have a shop which sold them. Suddenly, his master's hand closed in on his hair, pulling hard on it when Tomura tried to stand up, making him groan. His teacher then let go of it and the teen rubbed his head, trying to ease the pain. Watch your tongue when you talk to me, Shigaraki Tomura, All for one said with his calm and soothing voice, but Tomura knew that it was a warning. I will, sensei. Tomura shivered at the memory, but thinking about sensei's lessons kept him from wandering to thoughts which made him feel even more uncomfortable. He had kept himself busy this way for days, maybe weeks. Tomura didn't keep track of the time anymore. His wounds were still bandaged, but didn't hurt anymore, and although he could have cleaned them himself, he found himself craving for company and therefore let the doctors do their work, even if he hated them touching him. One of these days All Might came back and Tomura's eyes glowed up when he saw the man holding an older American board game under his arm. Hello, Tomura. The man then greeted him, his smile warm and fatherly. Tomura caught himself and quickly looked away. But All Might didn't seem to mind that the younger one did not greet back. He sat down, started unpacking the box, placing the pieces of plastic onto the board in a manner that made it look like he already knew the game very well. The guards don't want to play anymore? Tomura asked, still mostly looking away but occasionally peeking at the man setting up the game. All Might shook his head. I cannot tell you about the things we speak outside, but I can tell you that you're wrong. Tomura decided not to further comment on that. Once the game was set up, All Might took the dices and placed them in front of Tomura. You start, kid. Tomura then turned to him, not able to resist a good board game, and observed the way All Might had placed the villagers, a blue and a yellow tribe. And blue, he declared, and moved 3 of the villagers standing on the island's outer circle directly into the sea field. Then removed one of the main island's pieces on All Might's side, one which didn't have any villagers placed on it, and turned it upside down, showing the symbol of a shark. After he had placed a shark token onto that field, Tomura rolled the 2 dices. Dive and Sea Serpent. All Might's villagers were going to have a hard time getting off the island. He was off to a good start. Then it was All Might's turn. None of his villagers were placed onto the sea fields. He instead moved the meeples standing on the inner circles of the island more to the outside. When he removed one of the tiles on Tomura's side, a whirlpool showed up and killed 2 of Tomura's blue villagers. It didn't matter, nothing was decided yet. The hero rolled a number in the Sea Serpent, moving away the one Tomura had placed near the tiles his villagers were standing on. Just as Tomura was about to start his turn, All Might spoke up. One of my students would like to visit you. The kid stopped his movement, holding his hand in midair. Why? He tried to ask calmly, but his voice was shaky, betrayed by his feelings that were in an uproar again. Who was he talking about? When did this student want to visit him? Why would one of the students he had tried to kill so many times want to visit him in the first place? What was happening? He wants to get to know you, and it would be a great learning experience for him, and he could make his semester project about this topic. You mean about how to treat the scum like me once we are caught and jailed? Tomura spit out and reached up to his neck, but didn't scratch yet. You're not scum, Tomura. All Might eyes looked sad saying that. You're the only one who thinks that way. It hurt Tomura speaking those words aloud, but he threw them at him like an insult. You're the only one who thinks that way, and that's why you're stupid. He thinks that way too. All Might said, and the former leader of the league didn't know what to say to that. What's up for me? Nothing for the visit, then I don't want to see the brat. Tomura interrupted him, let go of his neck, and continued the game, moving 2 of his villagers to the rim and the 3rd in the C1 field towards the safe land. But All Might spoke again. It would be a plus factor in your therapy data. The more you work towards reparation, the better your situation will get. What's there to get better? Tomura asked, softly biting his lip when he heard how weak his voice sounded, cursing himself for showing weakness again. You're losing your touch, Tomura. Maybe once day, they might be willing to transfer you into a normal prison. Tomura looked at the man with a face that really didn't say anything. You wouldn't be alone all the time, and there are always a lot of things to do. For example, you could work in a garden under an open sky. Tomura gulped. He imagined his finger digging through the softness of moist earth, never decaying, never killing. Earth, with its distinct fresh scent, something else he could touch with all of his fingers beside water, something nurturing and alive that didn't die in his hands, hands that were made only to destroy. He let go of the island tile he was holding. Not in the mood to play anymore. All right, are you sure? Tomura nodded, although he wasn't sure at all if you're there as well. I will always be there, Tomura. But if you ever need someone to be a father to you, a father that won't hurt you, I'll be there. Notes 1. I didn't mention Midoriya's date by name because although I am not a shipper, I want everyone's ship to be possible. Tell me, do you ship, and if yes, what are your 𝗵𝗃𝗏 ships? 2. In one of the mangas, there is a concept art for Shigaraki where it said that he was a boy that loved flowers and animals. I am not sure if this applies to the canon anymore, but I want it to. Betrayal. All Might knew that it wouldn't be easy to get an official permission for Midoriya to enter Tartarus, but he hadn't imagined it being that difficult. After his last visit, the guards had talked to him about what they had heard through the microphones, informing him that they wouldn't let a hero in training know the exact location of Tartarus, let alone just so he could visit Shigaraki, a villain who had only caused them problems. But All Might wasn't going to give up because of them. The day after, he first talked to Aizawa after class, who next to All Might knew Midoriya's ability best and who was objective enough to evaluate the situation. All Might didn't reveal any information about Tomura or Tartarus, just presented his own perspective and how the visit could help Tomura and Midoriya in bettering themselves. To that, Aizawa said that he didn't care as long All Might was sure that the student was 100% safe. Midoriya wasn't going into the cell alone. All would be fine, All Might promised. After that, it was Principal Nezu who signed the approval, but only after All Might agreed to share a cup of tea with him. The principal often seemed lonely. An animal with a quirk still was a very rare being, even in a society in which almost everyone had at least one quirk, so the mouse appreciated every visit. He was a curious being, asking all kinds of things about Tomura, about how he was doing and what he was like underneath that angry surface. Unfortunately, All Might wasn't allowed to share most things, but what he was allowed to speak about were his own feelings towards the villain. All Might told him that he liked Tomura a lot, that he believed in him and that Tomura had a kind heart but had been misguided for most of his life. Luckily, the principal didn't try to convince him about how Tomura was a murderer. He just listened and accepted. A few days later, All Might visited Midoriya and Co., the kid's mother, at the place of their home and asked for her permission. Like the case with Midoriya staying at Ua after the whole Bakugo kidnapping affair, she was against it. Her son, however, who had been part of the conversation as well, eventually managed to convince her to approve and to sign the authorization letter. All Might was sure none of the people he asked for permission would regret it. Tomura is not like he was before. At the end of the week, All Might visited his notary, who was responsible for the rest. The man set up a letter and sent All Might's request together with Midoriya and Co.'s, Aizawa's and Principal Nezu's approval to the appropriate authority. Now, it was a matter of waiting, and All Might was aware that they would take their time in granting, or in the worst case, denying, his request. So the first week passed, followed by the second without anything particular happening, and soon, All Might found himself on his way back to Tartarus. Tomura, how would he react at seeing Midoriya? All Might was almost on the island, only a few minutes before he would get to see the kid again. He was already late to begin with, so he accelerated, racing towards his destination. Unfortunately, he wasn't going to see Tomura that day. Father usually hurt him when he drank, and he drank a lot, most of the time actually. But Tenko still forgave him. Tenko still loved him. There were days, however, when Shimura wasn't drunk, when he wasn't abusive towards his child, at least not in a physical way. On the very rare occasion, Tenko's father would hug him and ruffle his head, telling him how sorry he was and that he had not been himself, that he would do better in future. And Tenko forgave him again. He forgave him every time, because all he wanted was the man's love and attention. Tenko was not a stupid child. He knew that life had not been kind to their family. They didn't have any money, and Tenko knew the feeling of hunger well. though not only because of the lack of money, but also because his father would often lock him up in his bedroom for hours on end without water or anything else. He remembered wetting himself when he was locked up, which infuriated his father even more. Shimura would often grab his hair or head and throw him to the ground. One day all of this would get better, wouldn't it? Maybe his mother would then return too, his mother who had left him because he was cursed, a demon child. The next memory was from one of the times his father had taken him with him. He remembered them being at Kenai Station and taking the Nagishi line to Yokohama. His father had not been drunk that day, but not any less angry with him, slapping him across the head multiple times while they had waited for the train to arrive. Of course, none of the bystanders would say anything to him, telling him to stop abusing his son. To them, he was just a child being scolded for misbehaving. At their destination, his father had met up with some guy he owed money to, and that small child had watched how someone had beaten his only family into a bloody pulp. "Daddy, get up." Shimura did have a job, but as a drinker, the money just didn't last long enough. Tomura couldn't imagine the huge amounts of debts he would have inherited if he had kept the Shimura name to this day. Father. He remembered his past so well, yet his father's face seemed to have disappeared out of his mind. Tomura closed his eyes and tried to think about his father's appearance, but it just wouldn't show. Instead, his father's frame turned into All for One when he still looked handsome, then into All for One with a black mask, and finally into a skinny All Might. It didn't make him feel as uncomfortable and disgusted as he would have liked. Today, thinking about his past for once didn't cause any panic attacks, maybe because he was feeling good. Why? Was it his inner clock telling him that it was the day All Might was visiting? I shouldn't be happy about this. This is all for you, Shigaraki Tomura. He repeated Sensei's words in his mind, but with every day, they meant less and less to him. He was changing, and it was all due to All Might. I want to get out of here. He didn't want to admit it, but he missed the league. He missed how Toga Himeko talked about feeling good when she was with them, or when she swooned over Midoriya Izuku. He missed twice his split personality and even that simple costume he always wore, making him look like straight out of an American comic, and he missed Mr. Compress with his magic tricks. He hated to say it, but he even missed 𝗬𝗵𝗍, always acting so arrogant and like a know-it-all. But most of all, he missed 𝗓𝐺IRI, who had always been so patient with him. How long until All Might would get here? Tomura wanted to speak to someone, to listen to someone, and to have company. You can call me Toshinori. Should he? No, he didn't want the man to call him Tenko either. For a different reason though. Shimura Tenko is dead. Shimura Nana. Tomura shook his head. What did his grandmother mean to him? Nothing. He didn't know her and he didn't want to. But how ironic was it that his own life was so intertwined with All Might, and this from the very beginning, from the day he was born. Tomura wondered if All Might would bring the student with him today, but something told him that this special visit was going to be another time. It was kind of obvious he was going to bring Midoriya. He waited. Seconds turned into minutes, minutes into hours, with Tomura waiting impatiently for All Might to arrive. Had his body's instinct been wrong on the time? Had it not been exactly 2 weeks? I did stop counting the days. I really could be wrong. But he was sure that he wasn't. All Might, however, did not come that day. And Tomura, former leader of the League of Villains, successor to All for One and one of the most dangerous villains of Japan, felt like a child left alone. Tomura pulled his legs up to his chest and buried his face in his knees. Was it really so important that All Might came here? When had he started to miss his sworn enemy? He wanted to be angry, to feel the raw hatred towards the man that had. What had All Might done to him? He brought me shoes. He brought me books. He visited me at the hospital after I went back on my promise to behave. Hello, Shigaraki. Tomura startled and lifted his head to stare at whoever had spoken. Oh, Might, he asked, his voice timid. There he stood, a skinny blonde figure in front of him, in the middle of the cell. When had he entered? Was Tomura hallucinating? Was he dreaming? Had he just not noticed? And why did he call him Shigaraki? Are you supposed to be dangerous? Don't make me laugh. You look weak. Those words hit Tomura like a wall, and he found himself surprised that he would get hurt by them so much. Why would he say that? Why do you care so much, Tomura? What the hell is wrong with you? He asked, and All Might grinned. Don't you get it, Shigaraki? You don't mean anything to me, or to anyone else. I've been using you all along, making you addicted to me, and now that you're looking forward to see me, I'm going to let you fall. They should have just killed you. All Might crossed his arms, and there was something so evil glimmering in those sunken eyes. It made the whole League of Villains look like a group of kindergarten children. You don't mean anything to me, or to anyone else. Tomura bit his lips. He already knew that. But if he knew, why did it hurt so much hearing it from him? Tomura lowered his head and hid behind his hair. This was not happening. This was not real. You don't sound like All Might. What kind of trick is this? He whispered. All Might grinned. Haha, you got me. His voice suddenly changed, as did his appearance. The skinny limbs became thicker, and the white shirt and the green pants All Might usually wore turned into a black suit. Only a few seconds later, There where All Might had been standing, now stood the man who had saved Tomura all these years ago, his face concealed by a black mask. Sensei, Tomura couldn't believe his eyes. How could this be? All for One was locked up here in Tartarus as well. Was this another quirk his master had never told him about? And was he the only one who could see him? No guards were storming the cell, so it must have been like this, right? But how is this so important, Tomura? The only thing that matters is that I am here. His sensei's voice was calm, and only now did Tomura realize how much he had missed it. Do you want to get out, Tomura? Was that guy mocking him? Who on earth wouldn't want to get out of his damned cell? Yes, Tomura answered, concealing that he thought this was a stupid question. Then answer me one thing, my apprentice. Why are you betraying me? All for One then asked and pulled the ground away beneath Tomura's feet. The younger one couldn't believe what he was hearing. What? Don't make me repeat myself, Shigaraki Tomura. All for One's amused voice turned into something strict. I thought you were better than this. I trusted you. Why then have you decided to betray me? I am not betraying you, sensei. Tomura shouted to his defense and hated how pathetic his voice sounded while he did. Whenever did he become so small and weak? Why was his master so angry with him? He didn't do anything wrong, did he? You have lost your goal, Shigaraki Tomura. All Might is your enemy. Yet you are still here, waiting for him to visit you like a dog. His master's disappointment was like someone punched his gut over and over. All Might is my enemy. I know this, I should know this. Then why does my heart say differently? All these years, all of his life, he only wanted to kill All Might, to fight this society and its fake morals and ethics, and all for what? To bring justice to those like him. But Tomura felt as if he had wasted all of his time marching towards a goal that wasn't his. Don't you have anything to say to that, Tomura? All for One's voice became soft again, and he stepped towards Tomura, waved with his hand telling the younger man to stand up. The apprentice did, though slowly as not to hurt his still healing wounds, and stepped up to the even taller man, who raised his hand to caress Tomura's head. Unlike with All Might, Tomura wasn't ashamed to lean into this touch, and for a moment, it felt like they were back at the apartment, with All for One making him breakfast and him sitting at the table, playing some game on a handheld console. His own fingers had been so tiny that they couldn't reach all the buttons. All for One's hand went down to his cheek, caressing the dry and scarred skin around his eyes, his thumb brushing the scar across his lips as it went down to his jaw. Tomura, my little Tomura. All for One's hand then closed around his neck, successfully stopping any further supply of oxygen down to his lungs. Sensei. Tomura breathed whatever was left out and reached for the hand suffocating him, but didn't have the courage to pull it away. Was this his punishment for being so fucking weak? Please, Tomura begged, but his vision already began to show black spots. Then, All for One let go before of him, and the youth fell to his knees, coughing and grasping for air. Tomura. All for One started again when Tomura was done. If you are truly to be my successor, you have to redeem yourself in my eyes. Redeem. Shigaraki Tomura. All for One's voice was mighty. If you bring me the head of All Might's student, I will forgive you and get you out of here. Tomura looked up and frowned. The student? Had All for One been listening in on their conversations? How many times had he seen Tomura showing his weaknesses to the enemy? How many times had he seen Tomura laying there like a bag of potatoes because he was full of drugs? The blood in his veins froze. How many times had his sensei seen his beloved apprentice fraternizing with the enemy? I want you to hurt him first, and then you can kill him. Can you do that for me? Tomura lowered his head, his heart beating in his ears and his stomach feeling like after a night at the bar. Could he do what his sensei wanted? I have tried that. It didn't work, he admitted. All for One kneeled down and wiped away one of the tears that had formed in the corners of Tomura's eyes because of his coughing. I will help you, my apprentice. Will you do it? Who was more important to him at this point? The man who had saved him all these years ago, or the man who claimed to be saving him now? You don't have to hide from me, Tomura. I'm sorry I couldn't be to you what you needed me to be back then. It's all right now, I am here. But if you ever need someone to be a father to you, a father that won't hurt you, why am I not able to forget these words? It's too late for me. All Might, you can't save me from the path I have chosen. I ask you again, Shigaraki Tomura, will you redeem yourself to me? There was no escape from All for One. You either chose him or death. Can I kill All Might? Can I still do it? Tomura closed his eyes, and in the darkness of his mind a child awaited him. It was Tenko, little Shimura Tenko, who cried for his mother, for his father, for any kind of love. Love that All for One denied him when he didn't to his told. Love that All Might gave him even if he was a murderer. He missed father's hand on his face. He wanted to hide from this reality. He just needed more time to think. What do I want? Kill All Might. Kill the symbol of peace. Kill him, Tomura. Kill the symbol of peace. Kill him. I'll be there. I can't do it, but I have to. There was no other way to survive this. I will, sensei, he answered and hid the scarlet eyes behind his bangs. Oh, they noticed. All for One then suddenly said before disappearing, and the second after he did. Guards stormed the cell but abruptly stopped when they saw no one but a quiet Tomura sitting against the wall with his face hidden. He didn't startle this time and he didn't look up. They wouldn't let him in. No matter how hard he tried, the way to Tartarus was closed for that day. Whatever was happening in the high-security prison, no one would inform him about anything. Thanks to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, who was standing outside in front of his police car, he at least knew that there had been no breakout, but even the police officer wasn't allowed to tell him anything more. All Might just assumed that it was 𝗓𝗏 who was giving them trouble again. At this rate, there will be no death penalty for him before he breaks out again. All Might said, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded sadly. I agree, but there's nothing we can do to speed it up. It's not in our hands anymore. Unfortunately, I'm sorry Tomura, I hope you're not angry with me. Where do I belong apparently? No one had heard or seen Tomura speaking to his master. They didn't outright tell him, but it was easy to figure out that 𝗓𝗏 had done something to the electronic devices inside his cell. Tomura couldn't tell what. His master had never spoken to him about his different quirks, but the guards acting as if nothing had happened was proof enough. They were losing their cool, and this would surely speed up the process in giving 𝗓𝗏 his well-deserved death penalty. All Might didn't come that day, or the day after, or even the day after that. At first, Tomura had been angry and disappointed, but reminding himself what he had to do to survive this, he wished All Might would never come back. He was sure he would break apart if he had to kill someone close to him again. But Sensei is angry with me. He dug his nails into his arms at that realization. How could that have happened? How could the man he hated so much persuade him into caring? Tomura had never cared about anyone but 𝗓𝗏 and himself. He had liked 𝗓𝐠𝐵 and some of the members of the League, and he missed having them around him. But he hadn't particularly cared about them other than their use as allies in reaching his goals. But now he cared about someone, no, not someone, about All Might himself. I have truly become weak. Tartarus had broken him. Had they managed to break the hero killer too, or was he just so pathetic? Later, one of the caretakers came to help him clean himself. A tedious affair, but Tomura still had trouble completely moving his arms. The people beside All Might who came into his cell usually never spoke, either because they weren't allowed or because they feared him. This time, however, the caretaker who was replacing his bandages with clean ones chose to comment on his behavior. You're so quiet today, Shigaraki. Fuck off. He spat in return. Oh yes, he may have become soft at heart, but he still liked to show himself as an asshole, especially to those who kept him locked up in here. Tomura didn't eat his lunch, or dinner, or whatever they were giving him, for days, until they threatened to drug and force-feed him. Then he ate. But he never felt hungry and he never felt full. His mind was just too focused on other things to care about the taste of food. One day, one of the guards entered his cell with a special offer. Shigaraki, I am coming with a request. Don't give a shit. He answered and turned to face the wall. The guard did not care about his answer, continuing to talk as if Tomura had never said anything. Prisoner 8540, villain alias 𝗓𝗓𝐠, has requested a meeting with you. Tomura wasn't sure he had heard right. He turned back to look at the guard. What? Prisoner 8540 has agreed to accept our conditions if we would grant him a meeting with you. Agree to meet him and he will fulfill his part of the bargain. Or as you would say, everybody wins. I would never say that. The guard, acting as if he knew him, made his blood boil. How dare he? Will you accept this request, Shigaraki? This guy just completely ignored everything he said on purpose. You must be very sure of your security measures if you'd offer me a meeting with another prisoner. The guard's mimic didn't react the slightest at Tomura's words, but the villain was sure that behind that perfectly trained facade of his, the guard was thinking about 𝗓𝗏 and how he had used his quirk without anyone or anything, be it the surveillance cameras or the computers that registered his brain scans, noticing. Just answer the question, Shigaraki. There was nothing to lose by meeting with 𝗓𝗓𝐠. Of course he accepted, and a few days later, Tomura was led out of his cell and into another room of the prison building, where his former faithful servant was awaiting him. The air in the meeting room was different than the one in his cell, which smelled artificial, as he would describe it. In here, it was more like in the city, like cement during summer after a long day of raining. This only strengthened Tomura's desire to get out of Tartarus. The Black Mist man sat at a table, and Tomura never realized that it bugged him so much seeing 𝗓𝗓𝐠 not wearing a tie. Then again, he had never been very fond of any changes. The young man was led to his chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down, placing his cuffed hands onto the wooden table as he had been told before. As he did that, Tomura noticed how 𝗓𝗓𝐠 squinted his eyes in disgust, as if he couldn't bear to see the golden boy of his master reduced to a quirkless prisoner. What did 𝗓𝗓𝐠 want to talk to him about anyway? They were being recorded full time. No chance for them to talk about how to break out. And even if I do break out, what will my next steps be? Will I go back to my plan to kill All Might? How does that change from what I have to do now? You look different, Shigaraki Tomura. 𝗓𝗓𝐠 started, and what a stupid thing to say it was. How was Tomura supposed to answer to that? Already, he was feeling annoyed. How so? Your hair has grown longer and you seem to have lost some weight. As expected, he started with something superficial, but what strikes me the most are your eyes. They are softer than I remember them. Tomura averted his eyes towards his folded hands on the table, pointing fingers lifted. How many finger and hand exercises had he done as a child to learn how to control his quirk? Was this the reason his fingers were so long and slender? Because he always moved and stretched them? Or was he just more like his mother? Father's hand was shaped so much different than his. What a load of crap, Kurogiri. He didn't know what else to say. Shigaraki Tomura, what have they done to you? His concern was sincere, Tomura could tell. The fair-haired kid gritted his teeth. He wanted to scream about how they had drugged and isolated him, how All Might's stubbornness had broken his spirit, how they had touched him without permission and forced him to eat that disgusting prison food. Instead, he kept thinking about all the things they had not done. They had not tortured him, they had not let him die by his wounds. All Might had not given him up on him, not to this day. Nothing to get hung on about. Tell me what you agreed to do so you could have this meeting. I agreed to reveal the names of some people of the Union. What? Tomura shot up from his seat and knocked the chair over in the process. Kurogiri planned on giving those people the names of all their resources, finances, and supporters. What in the hell was he thinking? Shigaraki. The warning was immediate. Calm down, Shigaraki Tomura. Kurogiri's voice was calm and Tomura did as told. He cleared his thoughts. The mist was planning something or he wouldn't have agreed to do that. Nobody bothered to put up the chair. Therefore Tomura remained standing. It doesn't matter now. What does matter, however, is if Sensei was right. Kurogiri asked him and Tomura got the urge to escape, to hide from the guy that had been his caretaker for so long. He knew what Kurogiri was going to ask next. Say, Shigaraki Tomura, is it true? Have you betrayed all of us? Tomura's eyes shot up and he was sure that there was guilt written all across his face. No, it's not true. I have never betrayed them. Had Sensei visited Kurogiri in his cell too? Of course he had. Why else would Kurogiri ask him this specific question? Why else would he suddenly request to see him? Am I not one of them anymore, just because I don't want to kill him? He still hated the Hero Society. He still hated Yua and what it stood for. He just didn't hate. You're a fucking coward, Tomura. Just say it. You like his visits. You like that he cares. You like that he sees more in you than just trash. You like that finally, you matter to someone. Tomura cringed at his next thought. You like that he's like a father to you. What have the heroes ever done for you? What has this society ever done for you, Shigaraki Tomura? Kurogiri continued when receiving no answer from his protege. Out of all the children in this world, he chose you as his successor. All for one was like a father to Y. Shut up, Tomura shouted at him, his blood-colored eyes glowing with anger. Surprised about his own reaction, he looked away again and spoke low but demanding this time. I care about Sensei the most, but he was never a father to me. Don't ever say that again. He knew Kurogiri was not afraid of him. Then what about the League? They do not follow me or Sensei. They have always been your comrades. Don't you want to lead them again? You really think I ever cared about them? Tomura smiled, baring his unhealthy teeth like the crazy person he was. But what Kurogiri said next wiped the grin off his face. You don't care about them, but you care about All Might. The former leader of the League bit his lip, all the feelings inside him going wild at that statement, and he just wished he could hide his face behind father. How could your loyalty be so easily broken? This one was easy to answer. I guess I am such trash that I start to trust people who show affection towards me. Is that so hard to figure out? Not even my parents wanted me. That last part hurt him the most and he wanted nothing more than to throw it at Kurogiri, so at least someone could understand the pain that was slowly killing Tomura inside. But the youth remained silent. Nothing he would say would get Kurogiri to shut up. Trust me when I say that All Might will never want you for who you truly are. Why did Sensei not tell me about my grandmother? It wasn't as if he really cared about her. He didn't know her, but for once it was Kurogiri who was speechless. So he knew as well. Who told you about her? Was it All Might? Kurogiri dodged the question, but Tomura wasn't going to let him turn this. He was asking the questions now. Why, Kurogiri? Why not just tell me? Why does that matter to you? She left you behind. That is all you need to know. Kurogiri, give me an answer, Tomura ordered, but his voice was small and pleading and it didn't make Kurogiri do anything. Why was he not listening to him? Kurogiri, please. This begging was on purpose, and he hoped that Kurogiri would feel sorry for him. No reaction. This wasn't going anywhere. The young villain started to shake, but Kurogiri didn't seem to care. He only pushed Tomura further. Shigaraki Tomura, listen to me. You will never be a part of them. They will never forgive you for what you've done. They will always push you aside. Tomura could feel the tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. He swallowed a few times, successfully holding them back. He knew he was weak. Sensei knew it, and now even Kurogiri knew it. But crying in front of him? No way was he going to let that last wall fall. He's right. What was I doing, thinking I could ever be a part of them? Come back to us and All for One will forgive you. Where do I belong? Time is up. Do not speak any further or we will shoot. A voice echoed through the speakers, and the prisoners were led back into their cells, with Tomura feeling 𝐒𝐭𝐻𝐼's eyes on his back and being more confused than ever. Half a year had passed since Tomura had been imprisoned. One of the guards, a younger one, had mentioned it by mistake. 6 months, 6 months. The world has probably forgotten all about the League of Villains. Something deep in the corner of his mind whispered, wouldn't that be great? To start from the beginning, Tomura didn't like where this was going. He scratched at his neck and his mind became empty, just like he wanted it to be. All Might came back to Tartarus what Tomura estimated to be around a week after his meeting with 𝐒𝐭𝐻𝐼, a chessboard underneath his arm. I can't play chess. I could barely play shogi until a while ago. What kind of greeting is that? All Might placed the board and the gaming pieces onto the floor and stepped towards Tomura, who was sitting in a corner, his chin placed on his knees. Like a guarded animal, the youth watched the heroes every moment, but eventually didn't stop All Might from coming nearer. The blonde knelt down in front of him and ruffled his hair. Forgive me, Tomura. I couldn't come sooner. All Might then apologized, his hand now slowly brushing the knots out of Tomura's hair. But the prisoner wasn't a fool. He could read how All Might wasn't telling the truth, or at least not all of it. There must have been something he wasn't allowed to say. Had it something to do with All for One? Don't care. Right now. Tomura closed his eyes, enjoying the fingers of his enemy caressing his head like All for One used to do. The man's movements became slower, and when the hero's hand went down to his face and tried to push the bangs out of it, Tomura's own hand instinctively shot up, grabbing All Might by the wrist. There is no reason to be ashamed. I am not ashamed. Tomura unwillingly let go of All Might, and the man took it as a permission to continue. He tucked the hair behind Tomura's ear, and when the upper part of the young man's face saw the light, All Might gently brushed against the scarred skin with the back of his fingers. Who did this to you? Tomura bit his tongue before answering, I did. Why? Because I hate myself more than I hate you. He clenched his fists, digging his nails into the inside of his hand. A small part of his damaged skin was a side effect of his quirk, but nothing he couldn't have fixed with a bit of care. Most part was because he had teared at his skin with his own hands, causing himself pain and relishing on it. It freed him, it cleared his mind, it made him cunning, and it helped him focus. Then channel all of your hate towards me because I don't want you to hurt yourself. Tomura opened his eyes and scarlet met blue. From the vast emptiness and darkness that was the villain's black heart, a feeling of warmth spread out into every limb, every finger, every fiber of his being at All Might's words. That is, until he thought of his master again. He is watching me. Tomura jerkily moved his head away and brushed the hair back in front of his eyes. All Might looked confused, his hand still in the air, as if he didn't know if he'd just done something wrong, and so Tomura decided on changing the subject. Didn't you want to bring a student? A student I have to murder to get back at you. Again, the villain tried to convince himself that he wanted this, that it was because of All Might and this rotten society that people like him had no place in this world. A world which worshipped heroes that couldn't save anyone, him included. And it didn't work. With All Might constantly visiting him, he had seen that there was a different side of people. Tomura had become more vulnerable. The thought of killing someone now made him feel like all these years ago, when he first had to use his quirk on a human being. You will never be a part of them. They will never forgive you for what you've done. They will always push you aside. Right now, 𝐒𝐭𝐻𝐼's words were the only thing keeping him from completely losing it. Ah, now that you mention it, he will come with me the next time I visit you. All Might's confused look changed into a sincere and innocent smile, and once again, Tomura had to look away. All Might, sometimes you shine so bright that I forget the darkness surrounding me. I can't wait for the both of you to meet. All Might added and walked back to the game board. All Might, yes, Tomura. All Might sat down and placed all the gaming pieces onto the board. Where will I go when I get out of here? Tomura asked and quickly added, you know, theoretically. All Might stopped with what he was doing and looked at him like he just asked if the sky was blue or green. You can live with me, of course. Hey, I own a house downtown. I thought about giving it away since it's way too big for me alone. But if you'd come to live with me, well, we could use the space and you'd have your own room. The man continued to place the pieces onto the board. He spoke about Tomura moving in with him as if they were talking about something as casual as the weather. Tomura on the other side couldn't believe what he was hearing. All Might planned on taking him in. He would never get out in the first place, but just the thought of it. I will save you from the darkness, and maybe you could go back to the previous name. All Might quietly mentioned and placed the last piece onto the board, a piece Tomura remembered being called a knight. All the happiness vanished instantly after that name was spoken. Are you fucking kidding me? Tomura asked in a lowly, warning voice. All Might was in dangerous territory again. Wouldn't it be easier to live with a proper name? I don't even mean your first name, but Shimura. How many times do I have to tell you not to fucking call me that? I am not who I was anymore. I am not Shimura Tenko. I am sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Forgive me, Tomura. Whatever, Tomura wasn't stupid, but it took him a while to memorize all the different figures and their possible movements, although one had to mention that All Might wasn't a very good teacher. Not like Tomura was in the mood to play anyway. All he could think of was how he had to hurt All Might to get All for One's approval. Soon, he guards called time without them having played one game. The hero ruffled Tomura's hair again before standing up to leave, but Tomura could not let it end like this, not with All Might thinking that he was pissed at him. All Might, wait, he called and got on his feet. The hero stopped right before the exit, looked at the guard who just shrugged and turned around to a Tomura chewing on his lip, with a pink flush coloring his pale cheeks. All for One's successor didn't know how much younger he looked when he ditched the evil gaze. He stuttered and All Might waited patiently for him to find his tongue. Thank you for everything. What a weird thing it was to say for him. Tomura had expected All Might to smugly say something like "you're welcome" or "my pleasure," to simply nod, to ruffle his hair again. Anything but what he did. Half a second later, Tomura found himself in the former number 1 hero's arms again. Always Tomura. With his ear against All Might's chest, Tomura could hear his heartbeat, but missed how it jumped with joy when the kid brought up his own arms, returning the embrace. Sensei, I know you're watching. I do everything for you, but this moment, I take for myself. 𝗵𝘃𝗄 prison. A few weeks ago the world had never been kind to 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝐻, or Spinner as he was known now. Even the members of the League of Villains occasionally called him a lizard guy, reminding him that he wasn't normal. For the heroes, bullying someone because he was different wasn't enough to step in. Then Stain made his appearance in the public. He sought out the heroes whose only goal was glory, money, and fame, and with this motivation, people like Spinner, who had been pushed aside by society and heroes alike, finally found a purpose to live and a way to get their justice. Spinner wasn't a criminal for the sake of being one. He wanted to achieve a goal and open up a world where people like him, or 𝗬𝗏𝗺 or Toga, would be welcome as well. Unfortunately, Shigaraki Tomura did not seem to have the same goal as him. Spinner despised their leader, but without him, they stood no chance of reforming justice. It was Shigaraki who had the connections and the resources, and let's be real for a second. Neither Spinner nor 𝗬𝗏𝗺 or anyone else in the league had the qualities to lead. They needed him back. But for that to happen, they needed to get out themselves. 𝗬𝗏𝗺, Mr. Compress and he were in prison, their quirks bound. Toga was either in a prison for women or a locked psychiatry. Twice was who knew where. The whole situation had not been looking too good for them for months. Until now. Everything will be fine. Do you want to go back? All Might asked his student who was sitting on the passenger seat. The younger man's fingers were buried into his green school uniform pants and he was sweating, big drops wandering down his forehead. The teenager was naturally pale, but he currently looked like a sheet of paper. To All Might, it was only natural that his apprentice was so nervous. Midoriya hadn't seen Tomura since the day he had beaten him and he had no idea how much the villain had changed. It's not even fair calling him a villain anymore. No, I really want to do this. Midoriya objected. Are you sure? You don't have to force yourself, young Midoriya, and you don't need to prove something to anyone. He said that, but the former number 1 really wanted Tomura to get a visit from someone else beside him. If a younger person, especially a student of the school he had once attacked, would have the courage to go into his cell, there was a small chance that Tomura would start to see himself as human again. Once Nana's grandson was able to accept himself, he would maybe start regretting. And if he truly regretted all the things he had done, then he could eventually forgive himself as well, which would mean that I will get the possibility to show you all the wonderful things in the world. Tomura, I know you don't believe there are any good things in this life. How could you believe that after a life like this? But I will convince you otherwise. I want you to see the sun and the stars again. And again, he was thinking too far ahead. Even if Tomura regretted, who said that they were going to release him anytime soon? Who said he was going to be released at all? No one had seen Tomura like he had. Well, technically the guards had, but they were drilled not to feel sympathy towards any prisoner. Was there going to be a happy end to this story? Before all of this, I promised Tomura and myself to never give up on him. I will not do that now. I've come too far. If Midoriya didn't feel safe, however, All Might was the last person on Earth to try and talk him over, not even for Tomura's sake. This wasn't his apprentice's battle anymore. It was his own, a battle to free Shimura Nana's grandchild's mind, to free Shimura Tenko from Shigaraki Tomura. And then I murdered my own self, Shimura Tenko. No, you didn't. I will never believe it. During his imprisonment, All Might had seen the child inside of Tomura. It had been rarely, only a few glimpses of that purity and innocence, and All Might held those moments dear, closing them into the symbolic treasure chest of his heart. If there was one thing he was jealous of when it came to All for One, it was because the Underground King had seen Tomura grow from a boy to a young man, something All Might would never get to see. Was this the jealousy and sadness a mother or a father felt when they realized that they had been gone for too long, not seeing their own children grow? Shimura Tenko. What a beautiful name, unusual for a boy, unusual for a child in general. But it fit him so well, a special name for a special personality and a special quirk. Instead, the boy wanted to be called Shigaraki Tomura, a name that held so much villainy and pain, a name that associated him with death. All Might had seen Tomura's signature on the investigation papers, below all the other personal information like hair and eye color, sex, height, and blood type, a kanji used for the word funeral. Horrible. I hope I'll be able to call you by your real name one day. Out of the corners of his eyes, he could watch Midoriya letting go of his pants, wiping away the sweat on his forehead and taking the notebook he always carried around out of his bag. I am sure, All Might, he said with a newly gained confidence and turned the pages of his notebook. I have even made some notes on what to talk about. All Might smiled proudly. I couldn't even stop you if I wanted to. You are on the best way of becoming a hero, young Midoriya. You're not allowed to mention Tomura's name in your project, right? Aizawa said something about that. The freckled young man nodded. Yes, he doesn't think the school would agree to me visiting Shigaraki. But I think Kacchan noticed something anyway. Backugu, why do you think so? He'd had told Kirishima about my project. I don't know for sure, but I think he told Kacchan. I don't get why he would be interested in it in the first place, but he's been very abrasive these past 2 weeks. All Might frowned. Don't get me wrong, young Midoriya, but isn't he always a bit abrasive towards you? I guess, but it's different this time. I see. All Might didn't see it at all. How was it different this time? He liked Backugu for who he was, but the young hero wasn't really known for a very diverse character and way of thinking and looking at things. He could be abrasive towards Midoriya for no logical reason. The kid gets even angry when someone walked in front of him. But what was he supposed to say? If Backugu really had realized who Midoriya was visiting, All Might would have to sit down with the lad and have a chat. It was not the idea to let Backugu feel excluded after all this time. He already knew about One for All and All for One. He might as well know about Midoriya wanting to visit the prisoner they put in jail in the first place. But what if he wanted to go to Tartarus too? No, not Backugu. He would only go to fight Tomura again. All Might noticed the gaslight flashing up. Oh, what's wrong? Nothing. It really wasn't even worth mentioning. I thought I just pumped some gas, but it's already almost gone. The car doesn't feel as light either. I will have to tell the rental place. Will we make it anyway? Sure, we're actually almost there. In Tartarus, everything went as smoothly as All Might had wanted it to go. The prison's security guards were already informed of a student visiting and guided them both to the elevators, giving the student a feeling of safety. All Might was used to everything in here, but Midoriya couldn't stop looking around, taking in everything his eyes would catch just like Gran Torino had done. How was his master, anyway? All Might made a mental note to get in touch with the older man soon. He, who had always been so skeptical about Tomura, would want to know about the progress the prisoner had made these months. On the lower floors, another guard awaited and asked them to follow him to Tomura's cell. The temperatures down here were always a bit cooler, and Midoriya rubbed his arms to keep himself warm. Too bad they took my jacket. You'll get used to it in no time, don't worry, All Might assured him. As usual, the guard informed them both about the general rules but added some additional points just for Midoriya. He asked the student to listen carefully and told him that not following the rules would have serious consequences, even if he was still a minor. First off, and this is the most important, we ask you to not approach to the prisoner under any circumstances. Please stay near the exit and don't move or walk around unnecessarily. Second, do not talk to the prisoner about any outside information, be it as simple as the date or the weather. If you're unsure whether you're allowed to talk about it or not, just take the easy route and don't do it. Third, do not provoke or threat Shigaraki and don't be provoked by him. He likes to play mind games a lot. On the other hand, it's important that you do not show any fear or he will use it to his advantage. Try to be confident but not cocky. It was a bit much to keep in mind, but All Might didn't doubt that his apprentice couldn't do it. He was a smart kid. The guard continued. When I open that door and Shigaraki is sitting or laying down, you sit down as well. If he stands up, you stand up too. Why is that so important? Midoriya wondered aloud. He might feel threatened if you tower over him, but we don't want him to get overconfident either, so always try to meet with him on equal footing. The man explained and looked over to All Might before he continued. These rules are usually not applicable, but you're still a minor, and even if the people higher above agreed to your visit, they still prefer not to be the center of the media because of something happening to you. He's already nervous to begin with. Don't scare him unnecessarily. All Might thought to himself and placed his hand onto his apprentice's shoulder. Do not fear, young Midoriya. I'm right behind you. All Might looked at the guard for help, but the man just frowned and a sudden anxiety spread inside the blonde's chest at that face. He feared the answer to his question, but he had to know, isn't that right? I am sorry to disappoint you, All Might, but you are not allowed to enter at the same time. All Might couldn't believe what he was hearing. What? The documents we received clearly mention only Midoriya Izuku to enter the cell. There's no word about you accompanying him. You must be joking, right? This must be a mistake. All Might demanded to know but received only a shaking of the head. Are you out of your mind? You can't send a student in a cell with a prisoner alone. All Might, it's no problem. Midoriya tried to calm his teacher but was interrupted by the guard. Are you suggesting it's not safe? All Might. Wasn't it you who made the inquiry? If you do not think that it's safe enough, we will cancel all of this immediately. Although the way the guard had said it seemed rude, it stopped All Might from speaking further. Am I really suggesting that? Am I secretly thinking that? The doctor with the bendable pencil came to mind. No, that's not it. I just want to support young Midoriya. This wasn't supposed to go like this. All Might. Midoriya tried again and he turned to look at the boy. It's all right. Everything will be fine. Wasn't it supposed to be his job to calm down his student? Now it was the other way around and All Might couldn't help but feel old, way older than he was. And he felt as if Midoriya had already surpassed him in many ways. But he tried again but stopped himself. Nothing he would say would persuade the guard to infringe the rules. He hadn't made them, he just followed. And Midoriya could defend himself, right? Tomura was quirkless. Nothing is going to happen. Why am I so worried? I should believe in both of them. All Might. We can watch and listen to everything from the camera room. Nothing should happen if Midoriya Izuku sticks to the rules. There will be guards standing in front of this door. In the rare case of emergency, we will intervene before something happens to him. Midoriya then stepped in front of the door and peeked through the little window. His teacher wondered how and what he was going to feel, seeing the man that had tried to kill him multiple times in this sorry state. Midoriya bit his lip. Pity, that was what he was feeling. The guard started to unlock the door. While he did that, All Might placed his hand upon Midoriya's shoulder again and the teen turned his head, waiting for him to say something. Young Midoriya. He searched for the right words. Thank you for wanting to help, and good luck. The young hero nodded and put on a bright smile and All Might let go of him. How could that 15-year-old boy grow into a strong young man so fast? He had been nervous but he had pulled himself together and now here he was, visiting one of Japan's most dangerous criminals and wanting to help him. Your selflessness is admirable. Tomura was really tired. He couldn't remember having been able to sleep properly those past 2 weeks, constantly having to think about his meeting with Kurogiri, about Sensei and All Might and trying to find out what his heart wanted. It was all kinds of things from wanting to kill every living garbage on this doomed planet, to wanting to hear Sensei praising him when he did well in his training, to wanting All Might to embrace him. Sometimes he pushed into an even more forbidden territory, imagining what it would be like if he lived together with All Might in the same house. The hero had promised him an own room, but whenever he tried to imagine that part, he kept thinking of his old one near the bar hideout. The shelves in that room had been filled with books and toys, the walls plastered with maps and various news articles about heroes. It had been a dark room, an ugly room, a place with bags of trash piling up because no one bothered cleaning neither the room nor the rest of the apartment. An apartment that all for one had frequented less and less with Tomura growing into a teenager and further into a young adult. He had hated the place, preferred to spend his time at the bar, where he would drink so much he would fall asleep on the wooden counter to find himself waking up back in his room. But still, technically, it had been the place he grew up, and now all of his possessions had been burned to ashes. Come back to us and all for one will forgive you. Why had Kurogiri not talked to him? It wasn't in his character to act all secretive. Maybe because Sensei was watching. Shigaraki, you have a visitor. Tomura startled at the guard's voice. He hadn't even heard the door being opened, and when he looked up expecting All Might, a young man he just knew too well was instead standing in his cell. The student. This feeling. What was it called? Yes, unbridled rage. Yes, that was the feeling that was taking a hold of his heart and his whole body. Rage because it was him. Who else could it have been? Of course it was him. The guard patted the teens back before closing the door, leaving them effectively alone, and the kid at Tomura's mercy. An urge to kill inside his brain switched on and he suddenly felt all of his body burn with energy. He wanted to take in the irony smell of blood and fill his lungs with the smell of death, the death of one of the students that had put him in here. Had it not been for him, Tomura would have been able to kill the symbol of peace back at the attack on you. Had it not been for him, the Vanguard Action Squad's other members, Moonfish, Mustard, and Muscular, would not have been arrested. Had it not been for him, Tomura would have been able to escape with the kidnapped classmate through the portal his sensei had opened. It would have been an even more fatal blow to UA. And the heroes and maybe Sensei wouldn't have been arrested. Had it not been for Midoriya Izuku, Tomura wouldn't have been caught and put into Tartarus. And then All Might would have never been able to visit him. And everything would be as it was before. Everything would be fine. The young hero made a step back, as if he could read Tomura's mind and feel the bloodlust. This was the student Tomura would have to kill to prove himself to his master, and oh, how much he suddenly wanted it. But right now, the kid was too cautious. Calm down, Tomura. It wasn't easy, and Tomura felt like a drug addict, seeking the next shot that would calm his whole being. There was an impulse to lay all of his finger on the teen's neck, chest, face, and funny how he kind of knew that it was this guy who would come to visit, but he's still surprised. Tomura took a deep breath and greeted his visitor, Midoriya Izuku. How truly different they were, not only when it came to the side they chose to be on in this world. Even their faces. Midoriya's was so perfect. He was plain and not even his freckles could save that. He was so plain he could have been the perfect protagonist of a book or a manga, making the readers see themselves in him. Shigaraki Tomura. Midoriya's voice was tiny, like a mouse. He sat down, probably something the guards had told him to do. Midoriya had just felt his bloodlust. No one in that situation would sit down unless he had been told to do so. Tomura wasn't stupid. When were they ever going to stop underestimating him? Tell me, hero. He made sure to lay all of his venom into his words. Why are you here? What could the pure Midoriya Izuku want from someone like me? Midoriya looked already overstrained with this question. He was sweating and was getting pale. He grit his teeth before speaking again, this time with a stronger voice and a confidence he seemed to have taken out of nowhere. I want to help too. Help? Tamura repeated and burst into laughter. The confused look that appeared on Midoriya's face only made him laugh harder. Help? I don't need any help. How could you ever help me, hero? He grinned widely and could feel his lips starting to crack again. Midoriya couldn't hide his fear from the prisoner. He just switched from being scared in one moment to becoming a confident wannabe hero the next. All for One's apprentice was actually surprised he had not been warned yet through the speakers. Was All Might in Tartarus as well, and if yes, was he watching? Why would he let Midoriya do this all alone? Hadn't he promised to be there as well? Or was this all Midoriya's idea? Kid probably wants to act all grown up. It's almost cute. I'll tear your dreams apart. There isn't much I can do, but I guessed you were lonely in here. Midoriya's eyes wandered down to his hands, and it looked as if he blamed himself for putting Tomura in this position. He was obviously trying to make up for that, and there was only one reason why, because All Might had told Midoriya about him. And now the kid was having a bad conscience and trying to clear it. Why else would he want to visit Tomura, the former leader of a group of criminals who had murdered civilians, other criminals, and had even tried to murder children? It was all just too obvious. The fact that Midoriya was feeling sorry for him made him so furious. That urge to murder this child in cold blood became even stronger, and Tomura could feel his own red eyes burn with hate. He wanted to get these gloves off and grab that neck and disintegrate it until there was nothing more than dust. Right now, he didn't even care what All Might would think about him. He just wanted to stop the stupid kid's heartbeat. I hate you. I hate you and your friends and your school. Your very existence pisses me off. Midoriya stood for every failure in his whole career as a villain, as becoming the heir to All for One. A small voice inside him still cried for All Might's hand to brush his hair and for the man to smile so bright it would fill Tomura's heart with light. But that voice was silenced by hate, so much hate that poured out of that black hole that was his soul, his mind, and his body. I could be your friend. All of the anger and hate was suffocated in an instant. It had been big and daunting like a burning forest. But what Midoriya had just said was even bigger, and Tomura's burning fire was suffocated with what felt to be all the waters of the earth thrown onto him. He was empty. Friend. Tomura did not have friends. The members of the League had been his comrades. Had they been his friends too? Maybe in their eyes, not in his though. He wanted friends. He craved to have people around him who liked him for who he was. He had just assumed that there was no place for things like this in his life. Additionally, who would have ever wanted someone like him to be their friend? And yet, there sat Midoriya, the very kid who had beaten him, offering his hand in friendship. Everyone just passed by, pretending not to see, thinking that some hero would save the day. Who decided to make the world this way? Tomura never had the chance to consider taking that hand before his hate took over again. Where had this offer been all these months ago? Midoriya had never cared about him. He was so plain and boring, and still, Tomura was jealous of him because of all the things he was and had. He didn't get looked at when walking down the street. He didn't go to bed remembering snippets of his life where he killed his own father because of his quirk. Because he probably still had a family and friends. He was going to one of the best hero schools and having the time of his life, and worst of all, he was supported by All Might and all of society. Midoriya Izuku had all the things Tomura never had and never would have. He didn't want those things, but who in the world had decided who got to have everything while he got nothing? Today Midoriya was here, feeling sorry for the villain he himself had put in jail. No, Midoriya had never cared about Tomura. Midoriya only cared about what All Might thought of him. Good for him, because Tomura didn't care for him either. He stood up, and before Midoriya could do the same, the taller villain threw himself onto the student and pushed him to the ground, holding him down by the wrists. Midoriya must have been shocked, because he hadn't reacted at all. From what Tomura remembered, his quirk relied heavily on physical strength. Not that Tomura was weak, his slender body only gave that impression, but he shouldn't have been able to hold Midoriya down that long. Still, he was going to use the time he had until Midoriya would beat the crap out of him, until the guards would storm the cell and drug him, and All Might would be disappointed again and either visit him at the hospital or when he was strapped to a chair, because he had broken the rules. He had thrown away his last chance, but he didn't care anymore. He wanted to kill this kid, to dig his nails into Midoriya's chest and tear out his lungs and heart. If All Might didn't want him anymore, Sensei would acknowledge him again. Right. You think you're so smart, you little brat. I have long seen through your whole charade. The guards would enter anytime soon. Stop. Tomura. 2. It was All Might's voice he heard shouting through the speakers, suddenly cut off. All Might. The world around Tomura became black. He wasn't unconscious. What was happening? Come here, Tenko. He turned around to see his father, standing there with a bottle in his hand. He was looking for him, looking to hurt him. Little Tenko, I won't hurt you. Liar. Tomura screamed, get the fuck away from me. But his father was getting closer and closer, and Tomura had forgotten how much those slaps had hurt. You're a disgrace. Tomura let go of Midoriya's wrists, falling back onto his behind and holding his temples with shaking hands. Pain, pain. What was this pain suddenly shooting through his head? He closed his eyes and opened them again. His father gone, but his vision was too blurry to see anything. He didn't see Midoriya getting on his feet, storming to the exit. He didn't see that the door didn't open, and he didn't see Midoriya waving and talking to the cameras without getting any reaction from Tartarus guards or All Might. What is happening? Midoriya shouted and activated his quirk. He started punching the walls that didn't break, and Midoriya was beginning to panic. But Tomura saw none of that. There he was again, his father holding a belt in his hand. No more. Stop it, please, Tomura cried to the things in his head. His ribs hurt like back then, and Tomura embraced his upper body to protect himself from any more kicks. Stop. Please, Daddy, stop. He screamed at the man that he knew was not here. What was happening to him? Shigaraki. He could faintly hear Midoriya calling his name, but he was so far away. Please, he begged and cried, but Shimura didn't stop, and Tomura reached to decay him, but there were his gloves. And, no. All Might. He stood next to his father. Why did you do it, Tomura? Why did you kill him? The next thing he saw was Midoriya's body turning to dust, and Tomura looked down at his hands, both of them covered in blood. I didn't do it, he screamed. He had wanted to kill him, but he didn't do it. How could he have done it? Why did you do it, Tomura? It ripped Tomura's heart in half, hearing the disappointment in the man's voice, like his biggest fear had just become reality. I didn't do it. Tomura opened his eyes. His breath was heavy, his muscles strained and hurting, and his cheeks wet from tears. He was looking up at the ceiling, realizing that he was still in his cell. Had this all been a dream? Tomura. The voice spoke again, and Tomura stood up, his legs still shaky. There he stood again, Sensei. This time, however, he was real. Don't leave me. I around 2 weeks earlier. That various big fishes of the villainous underground could be caught thanks to the Japanese criminal investigation. The channel was changed to a publicity about a Japanese drama. Put that back. I wanted to see that. Kirishima shouted over to Kaminari Denki, who was sitting on the other end of the sofa and dribbling over the cute high school girls appearing on the screen. Don't you dare changing the channel, Kaminari, Mineta called, but Ida had already taken the remote from Kaminari's hand, changing back to the news. What is wrong with all of you? Mineta cried, but was ignored by his classmates, whose focus was now fully on the news. Ada raised the volume. Her responsible colleague has tried to get in touch with the people involved in the case, asking if there is any evidence supporting the rumor that a villain may have helped the police in their investigation. We will cut to him now. They cut from the news studio to the journalist, who was standing in front of what looked like a building of a police office. According to some of the witnesses in the multiple cases of these past days, the police squads seem to always have appeared at the right place on the right time. This apparently with the help of a nebula portal, a quirk that's suspiciously similar to one of the former members of the League of Villains. Unfortunately, we were not able to talk to anyone of the JCID, but expect to hear more from us soon. Back to the studio. Thank you for this clarification. We will stay on the case. Now to the weather. Tokyo Pref. While the others speculated about a possible cooperation between the police and the League of Villains, Bakugo Katsuki turned to look at Midoriya, who was sitting alone at one of the tables, not listening to the reporter or Mineta but chatting with someone on the phone. Bakugo wrinkled his nose. Something wasn't right. The idiot Deku was usually very attentive of his surroundings, but this past week, he had only had eyes for his phone or that crappy notebook he still brought with him every day since they were children. Yo, Bakugo. What are you looking at? Hadn't Kirishima just been watching TV? Why couldn't this guy ever leave him alone? Might as well just ask him what he thinks about it. Do you think Deku has been acting strange those past days? Kirishima furrowed his eyebrows at the question and looked over to Midoriya. The dark-haired teen was too focused with what he was doing to notice that both of them were openly staring at him. Not really. He looked back at Bakugo and grinned, baring his sharp teeth. But he sure spends a lot of time working on that project of his. The semester project. Bakugo could smell that he was getting closer to something. He didn't know what exactly he was looking for, and this only made him more eager to find out. Do you know what his project is? Why the hell do you care? Kirishima answered his question with a question. None of your business, just answer me. Bakugo tried to be patient, but his friend had that bad habit to unnecessarily drag out everything. If you say so. He didn't look offended by Bakugo not telling him why and crossed his arms behind his head before continuing. Hida told me it's something about prisoners and rehabilitation. Apparently, he's even allowed to visit some guy. Jackpot. Oh really? Bakugo's surprise wasn't staged. Neither was his anger. I fucking knew it. These stupid motherfuckers are planning something and are leaving me out again. He noticed his clenched fist starting to emit smoke. Calm down. I have no proof yet. Weird, right? I didn't know Midoriya was interested in that specific part of the hero job. How is his quirk even suited for that? But I guess broaden your field of interests can never hurt. Bad hair sure likes to hear himself talk. But Kirishima was right. Midoriya's quirk wasn't suited, and as far as he knew, Midoriya had never shown interested in the topic of rehabilitation ever before. He only cared because this whole project was about that Shigaraki ass. I fucking knew that idiot was acting weird. But now that he knew, what was he going to do about it? Was he just going to walk up to Freckles and force him to speak up? He briefly thought about snatching his phone, but Midoriya wasn't the weakling he used to be, and though Bakugo was convinced that he was still fairly stronger than his childhood friend, what was he going to do if he happened to be wrong? Embarrass himself in front of the whole class? And what if he found out that he had been right? He still wasn't going to be involved. But if they were sharing secrets about One for All and whatnot, he wanted to be part of this too. I will catch them on the spot. That will show them not to mess with me. Bakugo would keep quiet and wait for the right opportunity. If Midoriya really was going to visit Shigaraki, he would too. Neither All Might nor stupid Deku had a say in this. Bakugo. Kirishima looked at him with a concerned face. You have some evil on your face. Present, are you all right? Tomura. All for One was standing in front of him, his scarred face concealed in a mask helping him breathe. Tomura had never seen the man dressed so casually and completely in white, and it bothered him just like with Kurogiri. All for One looked like he had just come out of a hospital, or out of a prison. The latter was a fact. Sensei, Tomura managed to say through his heavy breathing. What the hell was that? A quirk. They have tried to torture me with it multiple times, in vain, of course, and now they have used it on you. I could stop it by breaking the cameras. Apparently it only works if the quirk holder is looking directly at someone. Tomura brushed the strands of hair away from his sweating face. A quirk? What kind of dreadful quirk was that? They haven't used it on me before. Why? Was it so inhuman that they had not been allowed to use it, not even on him? He felt the memories and the physical pain of this horror trip disappearing like the remains of a dream. But he was still shaking. Why was it that after all these years, he could still not leave the hurt behind that his father had caused him? It was as if he could never let go, as if he was addicted to an abuser and his cruelty. Tomura still craved for father to hold his face, to remember all the things that man had done to him, only to forget the pain again and to forgive him once more. It was a never-ending vicious circle, part of why he had become who he was. Because negative attention was still better than no attention, right? You're almost 22 years old and you're still thinking like a child. I assume you saw your biggest fears. What did you see? Tomura's lips parted, but he didn't speak and looked away in shame. Instead, looking around the cell, he almost choked. Midoriya was lying unconsciously on the floor, bruises all across his skin, and he was bleeding out from his side. Well, he won't die right now, not if they manage to get an ambulance within the next half hour. All for One interrupted him and waved his hand. The gloves on Tomura's hands fell off. Another quirk in All for One's collection. It didn't matter to Tomura in that moment. He raised his hands and stared at them like he had never seen them before. Freedom. Freedom was so much closer now, ready for him to take it. There was no bigger desire inside his heart. He just wanted to get out of here for good. Kill him. Tomura looked back at All for One, shock written across his face. Please, Sensei, we need to leave. The man didn't answer but stepped towards the younger villain, stopping less than 3 feet from his apprentice. Tomura was tall, but like with All Might, he had to look up to meet All for One's face when the man was so close. I am afraid I can't trust you right now. What? Tomura's heartbeat sped up and that cold feeling of anxiety crawled over the skin of his bare arms and down his back. Your comrades are waiting outside for you to lead them again. All for One grabbed the lad's shoulders and pulled him into a tight embrace. Something he had not done in a long time. It should have felt warm and familiar, not cold and foreign, and deep down Tomura knew that he had distanced himself too much from All for One to appreciate it, but he just told himself that was simply being too anxious to enjoy it. The League is here. He whispered into All for One's shoulder. Yes, Tomura, I want nothing more than for you to be my successor. All for One softly pushed the young man away. I want you to redeem yourself. Again with this. Had he not done enough? Surely his sensei had seen him attack the boy. Kill him, then we can all go home. Home. What even was home to him? Tomura turned to look at the Yu, a student who was lying there, unconscious and not able to defend himself, completely at his mercy. He had wanted to kill him. He had wanted him to disappear, even going as far as to risk getting strapped onto a chair for the rest of his life just so he could get his revenge, just so he could hit this society once again. This society that had made him this rotten. Why did you do it, Tomura? A shiver went down his spine at that snippet of his horror trip. Tomura closed his eyes. Home. What was he going to see in that darkness of his mind when thinking of that word? Father hitting him again. No, that wasn't home. Kurogiri pouring him a drink at the bar hideout and bringing him back into his room. When he was too drunk to do it himself. Kurogiri accommodating him. When he was too hungover to do anything. Sensei putting a blanket around his fragile little body while he was playing on the console. Yes, that felt partly like home, but something was missing. What about All Might bringing him books and brushing his hair? Or when he started playing those board games with him? Why did you do it, Tomura? Why did you kill him? He then remembered the hallucinated All Might that had been so hurt, as well as himself, screaming that he had not done it. Why did you do it, Tomura? Why did you do it, Tomura? The words echoed through his head, again and again, and every time they did, it felt like someone punching his stomach and taking the wind out of his sails, robbing him of every goal and every purpose his life had. Midoriya had offered him his hand in friendship and he had rejected it. Rightfully so. He still didn't believe the kid to have been honest with him. But seeing All Might's disappointment, even if it had just been one of his own projections, hearing All Might's real voice shout his name through the speakers, demanding him to stop, with my actions, I have hurt you more than society, All Might. Isn't that exactly what he had always wanted? He weakly shook his head, smiled to himself. I am truly an idiot. You promised me, Tomura. Do it and I will make sure that you will never see the inside of any cell ever again. All for One was standing behind him and Tomura couldn't help but feel like the man was a devil on his shoulder, persuading him to do the things he didn't want to do. The apprentice took a step forwards, then another and another, all of them slowly and careful as if he was hoping for someone or something to storm the cell and to stop him from committing another crime, another sin, another thing that made him lose himself even more. He stopped about a step away from the teen and looked down at him. Midoriya Izuku looked devastated. I was angry with you at first. His master gently patted his back. I was sure you were ready to betray me, but I have done a lot of thinking. I have never betrayed you, Sensei. Not even in his secret thoughts when he imagined living under All Might's wings. Had he ever thought about selling out his teacher or his comrades? It wasn't in his nature. Everyone in your position would have done the same. They have isolated you. They have drugged and humiliated you. You would have been stupid not to take All Might's help. Why do you know all this? Tomura asked without leaving Midoriya out of his sight. Haven't you ever asked yourself who your lawyer was? Why did his whole situation look like his master was pulling the strings again? Tomura frowned and started to think about the people that were always prowling around All for One like hungry cats. Someone from the Union. No, not close enough to entrust them with his golden boy, as the League would call him. But who else could it be? It must have been someone that wasn't known to the public. Someone with at least some kind of diploma in legal studies. The doctor. It was so obvious now that he knew. Very well, Tomura. All for One was pleased and wrapped Tomura's pale hair around his fingers. I have prepared for everything. I am not immortal and, as everyone could see, not invincible either. He let go of his student's hair and started to walk around Tomura and Midoriya. How foolish would I have been, had I not taken care of the problem on how to get any valuable information, should I ever get imprisoned here. You know, Tomura, they have all kinds of techniques to check on the people getting in and out, but they are so fixated on details, they don't even see the forest for the trees. It was an easy task for the doctor to give all needed information to my lawyer, who just used his own quirk to inform me about everything. I didn't even need to use my own and no scanner would ever notice. Of course, All for One had taken care of everything and it showed Tomura once again. That sensei was just on another level, one he could never reach. And who do you think approved of the documents for a hero in training to visit someone in Tartarus? The lawyers of the Union. All for One stopped behind him, such a good child. My followers are everywhere, Tomura, and soon they are all to be yours. But enough talk, my quirk won't hold them away much longer. Let's get this over with. Why did you do it, Tomura? All Might speaking again. Why couldn't he just shut up? All of this would be so much easier if had just stayed away. Kill him now. You knew this day would come, Tomura. Do it. It's the only way to survive. Tomura clenched his fists and bit his lip, delving inside of his mind and his heart, searching for that anger that had always been his only friend throughout his life. He let himself fall on his knees and reached for Midoriya's arm. The boy wasn't even going to feel it, so why did he care so much? This is not about him. This is about All Might. He could feel Midoriya's long skin already, his middle finger touching the arms first, followed by his ring and pointing finger. As Master said, just get this over with. You will never be one of them. Tomura felt a sting in his heart at that thought. His pinky was now feeling the cold skin too, one finger left. Then, a blinding light. So, your name is Tenko? A female voice asked him. A wave of memories washed over Tomura and he saw her. A grown woman with long black hair tied into a bun and gray eyes, long lashes and a mark on her chin, the same spot like Tomura's. She was tall and she looked confident and strong. And she was beautiful, at least in Tomura's eyes. First it was her standing on a building and watching the sunset with another man. A guy reminding him of that old one that had attacked him at Kamino and had even visited him once. Then it was her on a winter day, talking to a blonde teen clothed in black. Tomura couldn't see his face, but the hair gave it all away. All Might, years younger than Tomura was, probably more than 20 years ago. The next moment it was her, fighting with All for One on a battlefield that looked even worse than Kamino. I leave the rest to you. My name is Nana. It feels like my heart is about to burst. Knowing that you exist, Tenko. Tomura let go of Midoriya's arm as if he had burnt himself on it, falling back against All for One's legs, holding his head and instinctively raising his middle fingers as to not decay himself. My master, Shimura Nana. Teacher, one for all. Tashinori. It's your turn. Sorahiko. All Might. The words followed him back into reality. What the fuck? Ah, I can hear my little brother's voice. Midoriya. Midoriya had inherited All for One. I made a promise to your grandmother, All Might's teacher, the woman he had seen in his vision, the seventh holder of One for All. At that realization, Tomura got on his feet, facing his master with confusion and new rage. One for All. She was a wielder of One for All. I saw her fighting you. Why didn't you tell me? My patience is at an end. Shigaraki Tomura. Do what I asked you to do and let's get out of here. The younger villain began to shake again and took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. No, this can't be. This must surely be a coincidence. All Might had told him his grandmother had been a hero, but, Sensei. His voice was quiet but firm. Did you target her and my family? Did you target them because of One for All? All for One did not move or speak, and that already was enough answer to Tomura. But he needed to hear it. Did you kill Shimura Nana? All for One slapped him across the face so hard it smacked Tomura to the ground. The younger villain touched his pulsating cheek in disbelief and stared at the man who looked visibly furious, even with his face hidden. How dare you speak that name in my presence? I don't care if I was only a tool to you, Sensei. You saved me when the heroes didn't. But if she died because of One for All, if I really was only a tool for you just to get back at All Might, then my family had to die because of that too. Tomura noticed he was bleeding from his gums and the taste of iron was filling his mouth. You killed them with your own You know what the fuck I mean. The younger villain interrupted his master and got back on his feet. It seemed impossible to stay calm and to focus. He was so pissed. The walls around them vibrated. They needed to get out of here. All for One's Quirka barrier was already weakening, and Tomura could hear people trying to break through the door. But the urge to lay those cursed hands of his onto All for One face was stronger than the urge to escape. Don't you have anything to say for yourself? Everything I did was for you, Shigaraki Tomura. I don't mind if you hate me. Do it all you want. Fuel yourself with anger and become a weapon. Tomura's eyes became wide, and something in his brain switched. Suddenly, all his instincts warned him of a coming danger he would not be able to handle alone and told him to run. He searched for an exit, remembering that his hands were free to use his quirk. The young man jumped towards the next wall, his fingers spread and ready to decay his way out of here. But he never reached it, his body stopping midair when All for One's forcible quirk activation spikes pierced his chest. Right now, however, you have become too dangerous for me to keep around. You were like a son to me, and no father takes joy in punishing his children. But this needs to be done. Tomura couldn't hear his master speaking, his own screams drowning every other sound. In his mind, he begged his teacher to stop whatever he was doing, not able to take the pain. It wasn't the spikes drilling through his body that hurt him so much, it was something else, and it felt like a part of his being was taken away from him. Tomura bit down on his tongue. Please let me pass out. After what felt like minutes, but had probably only been a few seconds, All for One retrieved his spikes and let his apprentice fall to the ground. The fall hurt but was nothing against the pain in his upper body. He coughed out the blood and moaned because of that piercing feeling that shot through his chest whenever he moved. You will come crawling back to me once you realize that they don't want you, Shigaraki Tomura. Until then, I have taken your quirk. All for One sighed. I am disappointed with you. The doctor won't take care of you this time. See this as a punishment or an opportunity to learn. Sensei. Tomura tried to speak and coughed. He couldn't see his master. His vision was too blurry. If Tomura had not known what fear was, he definitely knew now. Warm tears wet his cheeks. Was his master going to leave him here? I don't want to die here. Please, don't leave. I'll be good. He managed to choke out before the world became black. A warp gate opened for the symbol of evil to disappear. Kurogiri. What about Shigaraki Tomura, Sensei? There was concern in Kurogiri's voice. We will come back, assured him, and stepped into the gate. What about Midoriya Izuku? All for One turned to look at the boy. He is already dead.